She found the skulls buried beneath her fiancé's roses, so she fled to the only men who could protect her. Four identical brothers living in the wild. They shared their home, they shared their hearts. But to keep her safe from the monsters of her past, one of them had to pay the ultimate price. Before we begin the saga of the Voss family, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and comment below with the city or country you are watching from right now. Now let us go back to the beginning. I am Stellan Voss, 44 years old now, sitting by this fire in Wind River Valley, watching my wife Margot tend to our four children. 10 years have passed since the winter that changed everything. Since the winter we lost Remington, my boy just asked me to tell the story again. The whole story from the very beginning. So I will. Because some stories need telling, need remembering, need to be passed down so the sacrifice is never forgotten. It started in Philadelphia, October 1887. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to when I was 34, when my three brothers and I lived alone in Dead Man's Canyon, and when a desperate young woman named Margot Pemberton was digging in a garden that held secrets darker than anyone could imagine. The October air in Philadelphia carried the scent of dying leaves and rain-soaked earth. Margot remembered that detail because she was on her hands and knees in Judge Aldrich Bramwell's garden, digging up rose bushes her mother had requested for transplanting. Her mother, who had remarried hastily after Margot's father died of consumption 6 months prior, who now lived in this mansion with its manicured lawns and carefully tended flowers, pretending everything was fine, pretending the grief had not swallowed them both whole. Margot's wedding was 3 weeks away. November 15th, she would marry Oswin Bramwell, the judge's son, and the family debts would disappear like morning frost under the autumn sun. That was the arrangement. That was the price of her father's death. The cost of his illness, the toll extracted by fate for leaving behind a wife and daughter with nothing but ledgers full of red ink. The shovel hit something hard, not a rock, something that gave slightly under pressure, then cracked with a sound that made Margot's stomach turn. A wet, hollow sound. The sound of something that had once been alive and was now very much not. She should have stopped, should have called for the groundskeeper, old Mr. Hewson, who was probably dozing in the potting shed the way he always did on Thursday afternoons. Should have walked away and pretended she had found nothing. But her hands were already brushing away the dark soil, fingers trembling as they revealed what lay beneath the roses. A skull grinned up at her from the earth, jaw slightly open. Eye sockets empty and accusing, staring at the gray Philadelphia sky as if asking why it had taken so long for someone to find what was hidden here. Dirt clung to the bone in dark patches. Roots from the rose bushes had grown through the eye sockets, threading through the skull like nature's own embroidery, weaving life and death together in a pattern that would haunt Margot's dreams for years to come. Wrapped around the cervical vertebrae, the delicate bones of the neck, was a gold necklace, thin and fine, the kind a young woman might wear on her wedding day. A locket still dangled from the chain, despite years underground, tarnished green, but intact. Margot's hand shook so badly she could barely open the tiny clasp. Her fingernails were caked with dirt. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps that made white clouds in the October air. Inside the locket, a tiny photograph. A woman's face, young and hopeful, with dark hair, pinned up in the fashion of 3 or 4 years ago. She was wearing a wedding dress. She was smiling. She had no idea what was coming for her. The world tilted beneath Margot's knees. She dug deeper frantically now, her heart hammering against her ribs hard enough to hurt. The careful, methodical digging she had been taught by her father in their own modest garden was gone. Now she clawed at the earth like an animal, soil jamming beneath her fingernails. Her dress ruined, her white cuffs turning brown and then black. Another skeleton lay beneath the first, positioned carefully, almost tenderly, the bones arranged in a sleeping pose with hands crossed over the chest. This one wore a silver ring still circling the bone of her finger. The flesh was long gone, but the ring remained, catching a thin beam of afternoon light that broke through the clouds. Margot lifted the ring carefully, her entire body shaking now, and squinted at the inscription etched inside the band. The letters were small, precise, engraved by a jeweler who took pride in his work. To Margaret with eternal love. O.B.O.B. Oswin Bramwell, her intended husband, the man she was supposed to marry in 21 days. The man whose ring she wore on her own finger right now, a modest diamond that suddenly felt like a shackle, like a brand, like a death sentence written in gold and stone. Margot ran. She stumbled through the garden mud, caking the hem of her dress thorns from the rose bushes, tearing at her sleeves as if the garden itself was trying to hold her back, trying to keep her from escaping. Terror clawed up her throat like a living thing, something with teeth and claws that squeezed her chest and made the edges of her vision go dark. She tripped over a garden border, went down hard on one knee, felt the sharp bite of a stone through her stocking, and pushed herself back up without pausing. She reached the library and locked the door behind her, pressing her back against the oak panels as if she could somehow keep the horror outside, keep it from touching her, keep it from being real. Her muddy handprints stained the dark wood. Her breathing echoed in the high-ceilinged room, bouncing off shelves lined with leather-bound volumes that the judge displayed but never read. That is when she found his journal. It was tucked behind a leather-bound edition of Dante's Inferno. How fitting, Margot thought later, her mind cataloging details with the strange clarity that comes with shock. The kind of clarity that notices everything because the brain cannot process the one enormous thing, so it focuses on small things instead. The way the afternoon light fell across the desk, the smell of pipe tobacco and old paper, the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway counting seconds that felt like hours. A thin notebook with Oswin's precise handwriting filling every page. Margot's hands left muddy fingerprints on the cover as she opened it. She would remember those prints later. The way her own hands, the hands of the woman he planned to make his next victim, had marked his confession with the same earth that covered his crimes. The first entry was dated 3 years prior. Wife number one would not stop crying after discovering my particular tastes. I tried to be patient. God knows I tried, but her constant weeping became insufferable. Father helped me dig the hole in the east garden beneath where mother's roses used to grow. We planted new roses the next day. They bloomed beautifully that spring, fed by what lay beneath. I have never seen such vibrant reds. Margot pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from vomiting. Her fingers tasted of dirt and something else, something mineral and ancient that she did not want to name. The taste of the earth that had cradled those bones. The taste of a dead woman's grave. The second entry, dated 18 months later, was worse. Margaret was more resilient than the first. She lasted nearly a year before threatening to go to the authorities about what she had seen in the cellar. I could not allow that. Father suggested the west garden this time. The roses there needed fertilizing anyway. I am becoming quite skilled at this. Practice, as they say, makes perfect. The third one will need to be more carefully chosen. Someone with no family to ask questions. Someone desperate. Someone who will be grateful enough for the marriage that she will overlook certain things until it is too late for overlooking to matter. Someone like me, Margot thought. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Her knees buckled, and she gripped the edge of the desk to keep from falling. The room spun around her, the books blurring into streaks of brown and gold, the grandfather clock's ticking growing louder and louder until it sounded like a heartbeat. Not her heartbeat. The heartbeat of the house itself, this house that was built on secrets and fed on silence. Her father, William Pemberton, had died 6 months earlier from consumption. A slow, terrible death that had drained not only his life, but every penny the family possessed. Medical bills, specialist consultations, experimental treatments that promised everything and delivered nothing. By the time he drew his last rattling breath in the upstairs bedroom of their modest row house on Chestnut Street, the debts had swallowed everything they owned. The house, the furniture, her mother's jewelry, even the piano Margot had played since she was 7 years old, the one her father had saved for 3 years to buy, carried home on his own back because he could not afford delivery. Her mother, Cecilia, frantic with grief and terrified of poverty, had accepted Judge Aldrich Bramwell's marriage proposal within weeks of the funeral. The judge, a widower himself, had been a colleague of Margot's father in the legal community. Not a friend exactly, more of an acquaintance who appeared at the periphery of their lives, always watching, always calculating. Margot remembered him at her father's funeral, standing slightly apart from the other mourners, his eyes not on the casket, but on her mother, assessing, measuring, planning. In his infinite generosity, the judge had offered his son Oswin as a husband for Margot, a way to clear her father's remaining debts and secure the family's future. Oswin was 30, educated from a prominent family. On paper, a perfect match. In person, he was polite, attentive, and had a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Margot had noticed that about him from the beginning the way his eyes stayed flat and watchful even when his mouth curved upward like a man wearing a mask that fit almost but not quite perfectly. She was the desperate one with no family to ask questions. She was going to be wife number 3, buried beneath roses that would bloom red come spring, fed by her bones, the way they had been fed by the bones of the women before her. The wedding was scheduled for 3 weeks away. November 15th, 21 days to escape or die. Margot closed the journal. She placed it back exactly where she had found it, behind the Dante spine facing inward, so the edge was barely visible. She wiped her muddy hands on her already ruined dress. She walked to the window and looked out at the garden where she had been digging. The holes were still there. Open wounds in the manicured lawn. The roses lay on their sides, root balls exposed dirt scattered across the grass. Anyone who looked would see what she had found. She needed to cover the evidence. She needed to buy time. Margot went back outside. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else, mechanical and distant, carrying her body while her mind screamed at her to run, to keep running, to never stop. She filled in the holes, replanted the roses, smoothed the earth with the flat of the shovel. Her hands would not stop shaking, and twice she had to stop and press them flat against her thighs until the tremors passed. When she finished, the garden looked almost normal, almost untouched. Only the slight unevenness of the soil and the smudges of dirt on her dress told the truth of what had happened here this afternoon. She went to her room and washed her hands 7 times. The dirt under her fingernails would not come completely clean, no matter how hard she scrubbed. She would carry traces of those women's graves beneath her nails for days. That night, Margot sat at her writing desk while the household slept around her, and she stared at a 6-month-old newspaper she had been using to press flowers. She had found the newspaper weeks ago in a trunk of her father's belongings tucked between his old law books. She had kept it for the flowers, not for reading. But weeks ago, a small advertisement in the back pages had caught her eye. She had read it, laughed quietly at its audacity, and dismissed it as frontier madness. Now she read it again. And this time she did not laugh. 4 brothers seeking one wife. Identical quadruplets, ages 34, ranchers in Wyoming territory. We seek one woman of strong character, hardy constitution, and open mind. Must be willing to share domestic duties and other responsibilities equally among all 4 husbands. We offer protection, provision, and a life free from society's judgment. Respond with photograph and letter of introduction. Warning: this arrangement is uncommon. Only reply if you can accept what we offer and what we will ask of you. 4 brothers seeking one wife. The words burned in her mind. 3 weeks ago, these words had seemed scandalous and amusing, a curiosity from the wild territories where society's rules grew thin as mountain air. Now they looked like salvation. Now they looked like the only door in a house that was quickly becoming a tomb. Margot pulled a sheet of clean paper from her desk drawer. She dipped her pen in ink, and she began to write. Dear Mr. Voss, I am Margot Ellison Pemberton, 22 years of age, educated, healthy, and in desperate circumstances that I cannot fully explain in a letter, but which compel me to respond to your most unusual advertisement. I am a woman of no experience with men, but I am not naive about the world's cruelties. I have seen cruelty up close. I have smelled it in the earth of a garden I can never unsee. She paused, pen hovering over the paper. A drop of ink fell and bloomed on the white surface like a tiny dark flower. How much truth should she reveal? Would honesty damn her or save her? She decided that a man who placed an advertisement for 4 husbands in one wife was not a man who valued deception. She decided that truth, however strange, was the only currency she had left. Your advertisement is unconventional, but I find myself in need of unconventional solutions. I understand you seek one woman for 4 brothers. I will not pretend I fully understand what this arrangement entails, but I am willing to learn. I will not enter marriage under false pretenses. I bring no dowry save my education, my health, and my willingness to work. I can read Latin and French. I have managed a household. I play piano. I do not know what skills the frontier requires, but I am capable of learning anything if my life depends on it. And Mr. Voss, my life does depend on it. She hesitated one more time, then added the most important line, the line that would change everything. The line that was both surrender and defiance in the same breath. If you find me acceptable, I can arrive by December. I have nowhere else to go. Truly and completely nowhere. Yours in hope, Margot Ellison Pemberton. She enclosed the studio portrait that had been taken for her engagement announcement to Oswin, a photograph that showed her in profile blonde hair, arranged in the elaborate style her mother preferred, expression carefully neutral. She looked young in it, innocent, breakable, like a china doll placed on a shelf, beautiful and useless and waiting to be shattered. Margot sealed the envelope. She wrote the address in her careful hand. Stellan Voss, General Delivery, South Pass City, Wyoming Territory. She pressed her father's ring into the sealing wax, leaving his initials in the deep red, a final blessing from a dead man who would have done anything to protect his daughter. She mailed the letter the next morning telling her mother she was visiting the lending library on Broad Street. She walked past the church where she was supposed to marry Oswin in 20 days, past the florist who was already preparing arrangements for the ceremony, past the dressmaker's shop where her wedding gown hung in the window, white and pristine and waiting for a bride who would never wear it. Then she waited, and the waiting was its own kind of torture because every day that passed was one day closer to November 15th, one day closer to becoming the third woman buried beneath Oswin Bramwell's roses. Now let me tell you about Dead Man's Canyon, about four brothers who had survived war and hardship, who had built a life in the Wyoming mountains with nothing but their hands and their bond, who were about to answer a prayer they did not even know they had prayed. September 1887. 2 months before Margot found those bodies in the garden. My brothers and I sat around a fire outside our cabin, the night air cold enough to see our breath, hanging like ghosts in the darkness. The stars above Wyoming were not like stars anywhere else. They were closer here, brighter, as if the sky itself had been scrubbed clean of everything that dimmed the light in cities back east. Civilization's haze smoke from factories, the collective exhalation of a million people living on top of one another. None of that reached us here. We were alone with the sky and the mountains, and the silence that had been our only companion for 3 years. We had been living alone since 1884. Before that, 6 years in the Army during the Indian Wars, serving in campaigns across the territories that made old men out of young ones. We had seen things that no man should see and done things that no man should have to do. And when we mustered out, we carried those memories like stones sewn into the lining of our coats. Heavy but invisible, always there. Before the Army, we were farm boys from Ohio. Born in 1853, all four of us arriving on the same cold February morning, our mother delivering quadruplets in a farmhouse outside of Canton, while a blizzard buried the roads in 3 feet of snow. The doctor could not get through. Our father delivered us himself, one after another, 4 identical boys who were so alike that our mother tied different colored ribbons around our wrists to tell us apart. Blue for me, red for Whitaker, who we called Whit, green for Dashiell, who we called Dash, yellow for Remington, who we called Rem. The youngest by 3 minutes, though we were all born the same day. Our parents died of cholera in 1874 when we were 21. Within a week, we lost everything. Mother first, then father 2 days later. We buried them on the hill behind the farmhouse, under the old oak where they used to sit together on summer evenings. We sold the farm because we could not bear to live there anymore, could not stand the silence where our mother's singing used to fill the kitchen, where our father's boots used to scrape on the porch steps every evening at sunset. We drifted, worked cattle in Kansas, drove freight in Nebraska, eventually enlisted because the Army offered 3 things we needed: structure, purpose, and a paycheck. We served 6 years, saw combat, learned to kill efficiently, and survive when killing was not enough. Learned that the bond between brothers, especially brothers who shared a face, went deeper than any other bond on earth. We could read each other's thoughts, finish each other's sentences, feel when one of us was in danger, even when we could not see him. The other soldiers called it uncanny. We called it family. After the Army, we worked 3 years for Phineas Lockridge, the biggest cattle baron in western Wyoming. Lockridge owned 60,000 acres, ran 15,000 head of cattle, and ruled his empire the way a feudal lord ruled his domain, with absolute authority, casual cruelty, and a deep conviction that the men who worked for him were not men at all, but tools to be used and discarded when they broke. We broke free of that in 1884, when we could no longer stomach the way Lockridge treated his workers and the homesteaders whose land he coveted. When we walked away, his son Dorian had sworn revenge, called it an insult to the family name. Dorian Lockridge was 25, then cruel in the way that young men are cruel when they have been given power without earning it. He had his father's ambition and his mother's coldness, and a scar across his left cheek from a knife fight in Cheyenne that he wore like a badge of honor. But that was 3 years ago. We had heard nothing from the Lockridges since. Dead Man's Canyon was remote enough that even grudges could not find us here. Remington spoke first that September night. He always did. The youngest by 3 minutes, though we were all born the same day. Rem was the artist among us, the one who carved wood into shapes so beautiful they made your chest ache, who sketched pictures of the mountains and the horses in the sky with a piece of charcoal and a scrap of paper that belonged in a gallery back east. He saw beauty everywhere, even in places where the rest of us saw only survival. "We cannot live like this forever," he said, poking at the fire with his stick. The embers swirled upward into the darkness, tiny orange stars rising to join the white ones above. "We need a family. I am tired of coming home to a cabin full of men who smell like horses and argue about whose turn it is to cook." Witt snorted. He was the intense one, the fighter, the brother whose temper ran hot as a forge. He had a quick laugh and quicker fists, and he loved harder than any man I have ever known, though he would have denied it to his dying breath. "No woman is going to come out to this God-forsaken canyon. Look at us, 4 identical men living in a box canyon named after dead people. We are not exactly a compelling offer. Unless she is more desperate than we are," Dash added quietly. He was always the thoughtful one, the one who had served as field medic during the Army years, the one who saw things the rest of us missed. Dash noticed when a horse was favoring a leg before it started limping. He noticed when the weather was turning before the clouds appeared. He noticed suffering the way a compass notices north automatically and without effort. I stared into the flames, thinking about the life we had built here, thinking about the cabin we had raised with our own hands, the cattle we ran in the high meadows, the garden we tended in summer, the game we hunted in fall. It was a good life. Hard but good, and it was incomplete. A table set for 4 when it should have been set for 5. An empty chair that none of us acknowledged, but all of us felt. "Mail order bride," I said finally, "but we have to be honest about the arrangement. Complete honesty, no surprises after she arrives." My brothers looked at me. We had been soldiers together, survived battles that killed better men, lived through winters that froze the unprepared solid in their bedrolls. We had become each other's entire family because blood family was gone, because cholera and time and distance had stripped away everyone else. And we had come to understand something that most men never would, something that society would call unnatural, but that felt to us as natural as breathing. We were bound together, could not be separated, would not want to be. Where one Voss brother went, the others followed. What one Voss brother loved, the others loved too. It was not a choice. It was simply who we were. "If we find a wife," Witt said slowly, "she would have to be shared. Equally, I will not sit in a corner while my brothers have what I cannot." "None of us deserves her more than the others," Dash agreed. "We are equals in everything. Work, hardship, danger. If we bring a woman into this family, she belongs to all of us or none of us." Remington grinned, that cocky, beautiful smile that would be his trademark until the day he died. A smile that could charm a snake out of its skin and make a preacher forget his sermon. "So all 4 of us marry one woman. That is what you are saying. One bride, 4 grooms, and a preacher who does not ask too many questions." I pulled out paper and a pencil, started writing by firelight, the words coming slowly at first and then faster as the shape of the advertisement became clear. I wrote it, rewrote it, crossed out lines, and added others. My brothers leaned over my shoulder, arguing about every word the way brothers do, until we had something we all agreed on. 4 brothers seeking one wife. We are direct men. We will share domestic duties and other responsibilities equally. We offer protection, provision, and a life free from society's judgment. Warning: this arrangement is uncommon. Only reply if you can accept what we offer and what we will ask of you. I did not expect anyone to answer. And if they did, I expected someone truly desperate. But desperate did not mean weak. The frontier had taught me that. Sometimes the desperate ones were the strongest because they had nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. The women who survived out here, the ones who buried children and rebuilt homes after fires and kept going when the snow was 6 feet deep and the nearest neighbor was 20 miles away, those women were not fragile. They were forged. We sent the advertisement to 6 newspapers in the eastern cities: Philadelphia, New York, Boston, Baltimore, Cincinnati, Chicago. Then we went back to our lives and tried not to think about it, tried not to hope. Hope was a dangerous thing for men who had learned to live without it. 3 weeks after Margot mailed her letter from Philadelphia, it arrived in South Pass City. The postmaster, a cheerful man named Irvin Judd, who knew everyone's business and considered it a public service, held it up when I came in for supplies. Letter for you, Stellan, from Philadelphia. Lady's handwriting. My heart did something it had not done in years. It quickened. I took the letter and rode the 6 hours back to Dead Man's Canyon without opening it because I wanted my brothers there when I read it. Because whatever this letter contained belonged to all of us. That evening by the fire, I broke the seal. The wax bore the impression of a signet ring with the initials WP, not her initials. Her father's, I would learn later. A dead man's blessing pressed into red wax. I read the letter aloud. My brothers gathered around me, leaning close, their identical faces lit by firelight. She is young, Whit said when I finished. Too young. 22. We are 34. She could be our daughter if we had started young. But Honest Dash countered, she does not hide her desperation. She does not pretend this is a romantic adventure. She says her life depends on it. That is a woman telling the truth. Desperate circumstances. Remington read aloud from the letter, his finger tracing her careful handwriting. What happened to her? What is she running from? I studied the photograph she had enclosed. Delicate features, serious eyes the color of rain, blonde hair arranged in a style that spoke of drawing rooms and afternoon teas and a life as far from Dead Man's Canyon as the moon was from the earth. But there was something in her expression that stopped me. Something beneath the careful neutrality of the portrait pose. Something that suggested more steel than her appearance indicated. A tightness around the mouth that spoke of words bitten back. A directness in her gaze that said this woman had looked at something terrible and had not flinched. Does not matter what happened, I said. What matters is she is brave enough to come here. Brave enough or desperate enough, and sometimes those are the same thing. We argued about it for hours. Whit worried we would overwhelm her. Dash insisted we were honorable men, that we would be careful. Remington wanted to tell her everything, no deception, no sugarcoating, no pretending we were something we were not. I agreed. If she came to us, she needed to know exactly what she was agreeing to. The frontier killed people who walked in with false expectations. And we were not men who lied. We had done many things in our lives, some of them hard and some of them ugly, but we had never lied. Not to each other and not to anyone else. I wrote the reply in my own hand. Direct, blunt. The way soldiers communicate when lives depend on clarity, and there is no room for misunderstanding. Miss Pemberton, we are direct men, so I will be direct. You will be wife to all four of us. 1 marriage in the eyes of the law signed in my name. 4 marriages in the eyes of God and our community, honored equally by all. The law will not recognize it, but we will. We are not gentle men, but we are honorable ones. We will protect you with our lives. We will provide for you. We will respect you. And we will expect you to stand with us as an equal partner in this family. If this arrangement frightens, you do not come. If it gives you pause but also gives you hope, then arrive at South Pass City by December 10th. The Reverend will marry us on December 12th. Sincerely, Stellan Voss. I sealed the letter. Rode to South Pass City the next morning to post it. And then I went back to Dead Man's Canyon and did something I had not done since my parents died 20 years ago. I prayed, not to any particular God, not in any particular way, just a quiet word sent upward into the Wyoming sky where the stars were close enough to hear. Let her come, let her be real, let her be strong enough for what we are. And 2,000 miles to the east in a bedroom in Judge Aldrich Bramwell's mansion, Margot Pemberton received my letter 11 days before her wedding to Oswin Bramwell. 11 days before she would become wife number 3. 11 days before her body would join the others feeding roses in the garden. She read it 7 times, wife to all 4. The implications were clear. The arrangement was beyond anything she had been raised to consider, beyond the boundaries of every social convention she had been taught. Her face flushed hot. Her hands trembled. She should have been horrified, but she had seen what lay buried in the judge's garden. She had read what Oswin planned for his wives. She had held a dead woman's locket in her dirt-caked hands and looked into empty eye sockets that had once held a young bride's hopeful gaze. And between the horror she knew and the unknown, she did not, between the certain death of Oswin Bramwell's garden and the uncertain life of four strangers in Wyoming, the unknown seemed not just safer but necessary. She had 11 days to steal back her father's money and disappear. The judge kept a safe in his study, a heavy iron box bolted to the floor behind his desk, hidden behind a portrait of himself in judicial robes. Margot had seen him open it once, 3 weeks ago, watched the combination from the hallway where she had been pretending to arrange flowers in the blue vase that sat on the console table near the study door. She had not been spying. Not then. She had simply been standing in the right place at the right time, and her eyes had recorded what they saw, the way eyes do automatically and without intent. 18 right, 4 left, 29 right. October 18th, the date her father had died. The judge used his dead colleague's death date as his safe combination. He probably thought himself sentimental. Margot thought him predictable and cruel. She waited until the household slept. Midnight. The mansion creaked and settled around her like a living thing, old wood contracting in the October cold. She crept down the stairs in her bare feet, avoiding the fourth step that groaned under weight, the eighth that squeaked like a stepped-on cat, the loose floorboard in the hallway that would announce her presence to anyone listening. The study door was unlocked. The judge never locked it. Why would he? He was a judge. Who would dare enter his private chambers uninvited? The safe opened with a soft click that sounded as loud as a gunshot in the silent house. Inside, she found stacks of bills, bound with paper bands, legal documents tied with red ribbon, and a leather pouch containing gold coins. Margot took $200 in paper currency, approximately what her father's estate should have been worth before the judge's legal maneuvering had absorbed it into his own holdings. Not theft, Margot told herself. Recovery of stolen property. Her father had earned every cent of that money through 30 years of honest legal practice, and the judge had taken it through manipulation of the probate courts he controlled. She also took her mother's wedding ring from her first marriage. The ring Margot's father had placed on Cecilia's finger in 1864, the ring the judge had claimed as partial payment toward the outstanding debts. It had been Margot's grandmother's ring before that, and her great-grandmother's before that. 4 generations of women who had actually chosen their husbands, who had married for love rather than survival, who had worn this thin gold band as a symbol of something real and freely given. A sound from upstairs, footsteps, someone walking down the second-floor hallway toward the bathroom, the creak of old hinges, water running, then silence. Margot closed the safe. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs from the inside. She could hear her own blood rushing in her ears, a sound like a wind through a canyon, drowning out everything else. She slipped toward the back door, moving through shadows, holding her breath so long her lungs burned. The back door opened onto the servants' passage that led to the garden where roses grew over bones. Margot stepped out into the October night, and the cold air hit her like a slap, sharp and clarifying. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered, and she clenched her jaw until the muscles ached. She had packed a small trunk earlier that evening hidden beneath her bed. 3 dresses, 2 nightgowns, her mother's ring, a Bible with her father's notes in the margins. 6 books she could not bear to leave behind, including a volume of Shakespeare's sonnets that her father had read to her every Sunday for as long as she could remember. She retrieved the trunk from beneath her window where she had lowered it earlier on a rope made of knotted bed sheets. She walked to the end of the block, hailed a passing cab, told the driver to take her to the train station. By dawn, Margot Pemberton was on a train heading west, watching Philadelphia's brick and cobblestone give way to open farmland, then rolling hills, then a landscape so vast and empty it made her chest ache with something that was either terror or freedom. She could not tell which. Perhaps they were the same thing. She was leaving behind everything she knew. A city, a mother who had chosen survival over her daughter's safety, a dead father whose ring she now wore on a chain around her neck, and a fiancé whose garden held secrets that would follow her into sleep for years to come. She was heading toward 4 strangers, 4 identical men in a canyon named after the dead, a life she could not imagine, and an arrangement she could not fully comprehend. But she was alive, and as the train carried her westward, clicking over rails that stretched toward the horizon like a promise, Margot Pemberton made herself a vow. She would never be buried beneath anyone's roses. She would never be wife number 3. She would never again be the desperate girl with no choices. She was choosing the unknown over the known monster. She was choosing four strangers over one killer. She was choosing to live. And somewhere in Wyoming, four brothers were waiting for a letter that would change everything. Four brothers who did not yet know that the woman heading toward them carried not just hope in her small trunk, but a darkness that would follow her across 2,000 miles of open country and bring war to their doorstep. The train whistle screamed as it pulled away from the Philadelphia station, a long, mournful sound that echoed off the buildings and faded into the October sky. Margot did not look back. The journey took 6 days. 6 days of watching the landscape transform from Philadelphia's brick and cobblestone to endless prairie, from civilization's careful order to wild, untamed spaces where society's rules grew thin as the air itself. 6 days of sitting in a rail car that rocked and swayed like a ship on an ocean of grass, the rhythmic clatter of wheels on iron rails becoming a heartbeat that measured the distance between the life Margot was leaving and the life she was hurtling toward. She had purchased a second-class ticket, not the cheapest accommodation because a woman traveling alone in the lowest class invited questions and attention she could not afford. Not the most expensive either because $200 had to last until she reached Wyoming, and she did not know what expenses might appear between here and there. Second class gave her a shared compartment with wooden benches that converted to narrow sleeping berths at night, a small window that let in both light and cold, and the company of strangers who were too occupied with their own journeys to pay much attention to a young woman with frightened eyes and dirt still lodged beneath two of her fingernails that no amount of scrubbing had been able to remove. The first day, Margot did not speak to anyone. She sat by the window and watched Pennsylvania unroll like a painted scroll green hills, giving way to farmland, giving way to small towns that appeared and vanished like memories. She kept her trunk beneath her feet, her hand resting on the latch as if someone might try to take it. Inside that trunk was everything she owned in the world. Everything except the dead women's locket, which she had left behind in the garden, because it did not belong to her. It belonged to them, to the women whose names she would never know, the women who had been wife number one and wife number two, the women whose bones fed the roses that Judge Bramwell admired every morning from his breakfast room window. She thought about her mother. Cecilia would discover Margot's absence by morning, would find the bed empty, the trunk gone, the window open. Would she understand? Would she guess where her daughter had gone, or would she assume something worse? Margot had left a note, brief and deliberately vague. I am safe. I cannot marry Oswin. Do not look for me. I love you. She had not explained about the skulls or the journal. Her mother was married to the judge now. If Cecilia knew what lay beneath her husband's roses, what would she do? Would she flee? Would she confront him? Or would she do what she had been doing since Margot's father died, which was to close her eyes and pretend that the darkness was not there, that the walls were not closing in, that the price of survival was not too high? Margot could not answer those questions. She could only save herself. On the second day, as the train crossed into Ohio, one of the women in her compartment struck up conversation. She had been watching Margot with the particular attention that older women pay to younger ones who are clearly in some kind of trouble. The kind of watching that is not intrusive but patient, waiting for the right moment to offer help without being asked. Her name was Odette Flanagan. She was perhaps 50, with kind eyes deeply creased at the corners from years of squinting into western sun, and hands roughened by work that had nothing to do with needlepoint or flower arranging. Her hair was steel gray, pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, and she wore a traveling dress of practical brown wool that had seen better days but was clean and well-mended. She carried herself like a woman who had buried a husband and raised children alone and had decided somewhere along the way that life was too short for pretense. "Where are you headed, dear?" Odette asked on that second morning, offering Margot a piece of dried apple from a paper bag. Her voice had the flat vowels of someone who had lived in the West long enough for it to reshape her speech, smoothing away whatever Eastern accent she might have once possessed. "South Pass City," Margot answered, carefully accepting the apple because she had not eaten since the night before, and her stomach was beginning to make noises that embarrassed her. "I am to be married there. Oh, how wonderful." Odette's face brightened with genuine warmth. "Is your intended a miner?" Most of the young men in South Pass work the claims, though the gold has been thinning out these last few years. Town is not what it used to be, but it is still a decent place to build a life, a rancher Margot said. Then because Odette's eyes were so kind, and because the weight of her secret was crushing her chest like a stone, and because she desperately needed someone in the world to know the truth of what she was doing and why, she added in a voice barely above a whisper, "Actually, 4 ranchers, 4 brothers. I am to marry all of them." The compartment went very quiet. The other 2 passengers, an elderly gentleman dozing behind a newspaper, and a young mother nursing an infant under a shawl, did not seem to hear. But Odette heard. Her eyebrows rose toward her hairline, and her hand paused halfway to the paper bag of dried apples. But she did not recoil. She did not gasp or clutch imaginary pearls, or call for the conductor, or do any of the things that Philadelphia society would have demanded of a respectable woman confronted with such a declaration. Instead, she leaned forward slightly and studied Margot's face with those creased, knowing eyes. 4 brothers and 1 bride. That is unusual. Though I have heard of such arrangements out in the territories, the law does not reach far into places like Wyoming. What the mountains hide, the mountains keep. And 4 men sharing 1 wife. Well, it is not how things are done in polite society, but polite society has never had to survive a Wyoming winter with 30 miles between you and the nearest neighbor. Margot nodded, relief flooding through her so quickly it made her dizzy. She had expected judgment. She had expected horror. She had not expected understanding, and the kindness of it nearly broke her. "You know what you are agreeing to?" Odette asked quietly, leaning closer so the other passengers could not hear, though neither seemed to be listening. 4 husbands means 4 men sharing everything. Work, meals, decisions. And it means belonging to all of them equally. Not as property, mind you, I do not hold with that. But as their partner in all things, everything. The heat rose to Margot's face, a flush that started at her collar and climbed to her hairline. "I have considered it. Considering and experiencing are different countries, dear. You can study a map of the ocean your whole life and still not be prepared for the first wave that hits you." Odette paused, choosing her words with the care of someone who understood that the wrong word at the wrong moment could shatter something fragile. "These men, the Voss brothers, are they good men? I do not." "No," Margot admitted. The honesty of it scraped against her throat like sandpaper. "I have never met them. We corresponded by letter." 1 letter each. His words were direct. Honest, I think, but I cannot be certain. Odette's eyes widened slightly, then settled back into their customary steadiness. "You are traveling 2,000 miles to marry 4 strangers you have exchanged exactly 1 letter with." "I am traveling 2,000 miles to escape 1 monster," Margot said, and something in her voice, some frequency of terror and determination that words alone could not convey, must have reached Odette in a place beyond language, because the older woman's expression changed. The curiosity drained away, replaced by something harder and more resolute. Recognition. The look of a woman who had seen darkness of her own and knew its particular weight. "Tell me," Odette said. Not a request, not a question, a quiet command from one survivor to another. And Margot told her everything. She told her about her father's death, the slow cruelty of consumption, the way it had stole his strength an ounce at a time, until the man who had carried her on his shoulders when she was small could not lift a teacup without his hand shaking. She told her about the debts that swallowed their home, their possessions, their dignity. About her mother's hasty remarriage to Judge Bramwell, a man who appeared at the periphery of their grief like a vulture circling something not yet dead. She told her about Oswin, his polite smile that never reached his eyes. The way he touched her arm during their engagement dinners, his fingers pressing just a fraction too hard, leaving white marks on her skin that faded but never quite disappeared from her memory. The way he watched her when he thought she was not looking, with an expression that was not love or even desire but something closer to assessment. The way a butcher looks at livestock. And then she told her about the garden. Margot kept her voice low and steady, though her hands trembled in her lap. She described the shovel hitting bone, the skull grinning up at her from the earth, the locket with its tiny photograph of a young bride who would never grow old, the second skeleton with the ring inscribed to Margaret with eternal love, O.B. Oswin Bramwell. She described finding the journal behind the Dante's Inferno, the entries written in Oswin's precise hand, each one more chilling than the last. Wife number 1, Margaret. Someone desperate, someone with no family to ask questions. By the time she finished, Odette's face had gone pale beneath her weathered tan. Her lips were pressed together in a thin line, and her hands, those capable, work-hardened hands, were gripping the edge of the bench seat so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. "Sweet Jesus," she breathed. "You are running for your life." "Yes," Margot said simply, and there was something liberating about saying it aloud to someone who believed her. In Philadelphia, who would she have told the police? The judge controlled the police. A lawyer, the judge controlled the courts. Her mother. Her mother was married to the judge and had chosen the comfort of ignorance over the terror of truth. There was no one. She had been utterly alone with the knowledge of what lay beneath those roses, alone with the understanding that she was 21 days from joining them. Until now. Until Odette Flanagan, a stranger on a westbound train, looked at her with eyes that held no doubt and no judgment. Only a fierce, immediate compassion that felt like the first warm thing Margot had experienced since the October afternoon when her shovel struck bone. "And these four brothers," Odette said, her voice steadying, returning to the practical tone of a woman who dealt with problems by solving them. "They know you are coming. They agreed to marry you." Rosa showed her Stellan's letter. Odette read it twice, her lips moving slightly over certain phrases. "Direct men. Protect you with our lives. Provide for you. Respect you." Her lips pursed, then relaxed, then pursed again. "Well," she said, finally folding the letter carefully and handing it back. "They are direct. I will give them that. No flowery promises, no romantic nonsense. Just plain truth written in plain language. That is the mark of a man who means what he says, or at least the mark of a man who does not waste words on things he does not mean." "Do you know them?" Margot asked, hardly daring to hope. Odette nodded slowly. "I run a boarding house in South Pass City, have done for 12 years since my husband Podrick died in a mining accident in '75. I know everyone who comes through that town, and the Voss brothers have been coming through for about 6 years now. Bought land up in Dead Man's Canyon. Keep to themselves mostly, which is their right and their business. But when they come to town for supplies, they are fair dealers. Never cheated anyone at the trading post. Never shortchanged a transaction. Never started a fight, though I have heard they ended a few when other men were foolish enough to provoke them." She paused, and something close to a smile crossed her weathered face. "They are large men, the Voss brothers. Uncommonly large. And when I say identical, I mean it in a way that makes you question your own eyes. Four the same face, four the same build, four pairs of the same amber-colored eyes. The first time I saw them, I thought I was seeing double. Then I thought I was seeing quadruple. Then I thought I had been drinking, which I had not, because I do not drink before noon except on Sundays." In spite of everything, Margot felt the corner of her mouth twitch. Not quite a smile, but the ghost of one. The first ghost of a smile since the garden. "Hard men." Odette continued, her expression growing serious again, "but honest. There is a difference between hard and cruel deer, and it is a difference that matters more than anything else out here. The frontier makes men hard because softness gets you killed. Hard hands, hard decisions, hard winters that test every ounce of will you possess. But hard is not the same as mean. Hard men can be gentle when gentleness is called for. Cruel men cannot." "And the Voss brothers," Margot said. "Which are they?" Hard Odette said firmly. "Not cruel. I have seen them deal fairly with everyone they encounter. I have seen them give credit to a miner's widow who could not pay for flour. I have seen the one they call Rem, the youngest, carry a child's broken toy into the general store and spend an hour fixing it with glue and wire, while the child's mother did her shopping. These are not the actions of cruel men." Something loosened in Margot's chest. A knot she had been carrying since the moment she sealed that letter in Philadelphia, a knot made of fear and doubt and the terrible suspicion that she might be trading one horror for another. It did not disappear, but it loosened just enough to let her breathe a little deeper. "You said hard men," Margot said. "What does that mean for me? What should I expect?" "It means they will not coddle you," Odette said plainly. "Will not treat you like a porcelain doll meant to sit on a shelf and look pretty. The frontier does not have room for porcelain dolls. Up in those mountains, winter can kill you in ways you have not imagined. Avalanche, exposure, wolves, starvation if the supply lines get cut by weather. You need to be hard to survive. You need to learn to shoot, ride, build a fire in a blizzard, set a broken bone, and keep going when every part of you wants to lie down in the snow and sleep forever." Margot straightened her spine. The movement was small but deliberate, a physical declaration that she heard what Odette was saying and was not turning away from it. I can be hard. Odette studied her for a long moment. Her eyes moved across Margot's face the way a surveyor studies terrain, looking for weaknesses, looking for strength, looking for the truth beneath the surface. Then she nodded a single decisive dip of her chin. I believe you can. You have got steel in you, girl. I can see it. It is buried under Philadelphia manners and a proper education and a face that belongs on a cameo brooch, but it is there. You would not have survived what you found in that garden without it. You would not be sitting on this train without it. A weak woman would have fainted or screamed or gone to her mother and let someone else decide her fate. You dug up the truth with your own hands, read the devil's own confession, stole back what was rightfully yours, and got on a train heading west before dawn. That is not weakness. That is steel. Margot felt tears prick her eyes hot and sudden. She blinked them back. She had cried enough in Philadelphia. She would not cry on this train. She would save her tears for something that deserved them. I run a boarding house on Main Street, Odette said. Cannot miss it. Only three-story building in town. Bright blue door because Padraig painted it the week before he died, and I have repainted it the same color every year since. If things go badly with the Voss brothers, if you need somewhere to go, you come find me. Any hour of the day or night. You knock on that blue door and I will open it. No questions until you are ready to answer them. Thank you, Margot whispered, fighting to keep her voice steady. I do not have many choices left. We always have choices, child. Odette's voice was gentle but firm, the voice of a woman who had earned her philosophy through experience rather than education. Sometimes the choices are all terrible, but we still get to choose which terrible path to walk. You are choosing the unknown over the known monster. That takes courage. Does it? Margot asked. Or does it just take desperation? Odette smiled, and the smile was sad, but not without warmth. Sometimes those are the same thing, and sometimes the desperate choice turns out to be the right one. Not because desperation makes you wise, but because it strips away all the nonsense and leaves you with the truth of what you actually need. And what you need right now is to survive. Everything else, love, happiness, belonging, those come later. First, you survive. The train rocked on through Ohio, then Indiana, then the vast flatness of Illinois. Margot watched the landscape change through her window, watched civilization thin and spread like butter scraped across too much bread. The towns grew smaller and farther apart. The spaces between them grew wider. The sky seemed to expand, with every mile opening up above the prairie, like a dome made of light and air so enormous that Margot felt simultaneously insignificant and free. Odette proved to be the kind of traveling companion that Providence sends to people who need one most. She shared her food generously. Dried apples, smoked venison, hard biscuits that tasted better than they looked, and a flask of tea that she kept warm by wrapping it in a wool scarf. She told stories of South Pass City with the ease of a natural storyteller, painting pictures of the town and its people with words that made Margot feel she was already there. She told Margot about the mining days when gold brought thousands of men flooding into the valley, followed by the women who were brave enough or desperate enough or foolish enough to follow them. She told her about the boom and the bust, the fortunes made and lost in a season, the buildings that went up in months and emptied in years when the gold thinned and the miners moved on to the next strike. She told her about the people who stayed the stubborn ones, the ones who had put down roots too deep to pull up, who loved the land more than the gold, and who built their lives on something more durable than luck. She told her about winters in the Wyoming mountains, the way the cold could steal your breath before you finished drawing it, the way snow could bury a cabin in hours, sealing you in a white tomb where the only sound was your own breathing and the creak of timbers bearing the weight of accumulated winter. The way the wind came down from the peaks like a living thing howling through the canyons with a voice that sounded almost human, almost like a woman screaming. Margot listened to all of it. She memorized the details the way she had once memorized Latin declensions and French verb conjugations, because these details were no longer academic. They were the vocabulary of her new life. Survival was a language, and she intended to learn it fluently. On the fourth day as the train crossed Nebraska, Odette asked the question that had been building between them since their first conversation. What will you do if the Voss brothers are not what you hope? Margot had been thinking about this. She had been thinking about it every night when the berths were converted and the compartment went dark, when the other passengers' breathing settled into the rhythms of sleep, and she lay awake listening to the train's wheels counting miles. What if they were cruel? What if they were liars? What if the letter she had received was a trap of a different kind, a lure dangled before a desperate woman by men whose intentions were no better than Oswin Bramwell's, only dressed in different clothing? Then I will leave, she said. Mr. Voss said in his letter that if the arrangement frightened me, I should not come. I imagine the reverse is also true. If the reality frightens me more than the arrangement, I will leave. I still have money. I can go to California, start fresh under a different name. Good, Odette said. Always have an exit. That is the first rule of the frontier. Know where the door is before you walk into the room. And if they are what I hope Margot asked, and there was something in her voice that she had not intended to reveal, a thin thread of longing that surprised her with its strength. Not longing for four husbands, not longing for the unconventional arrangement she had agreed to, but longing for something simpler and more essential. Safety, a home that was not built on bones, people who would protect her rather than destroy her, a family, even an unusual one, where she could close her eyes at night without wondering if she would open them again in the morning. Then you will have found something most people spend their whole lives looking for, Odette said softly. A place to belong. It will not be easy. Nothing worth having ever is. But it will be real, and real is worth more than easy on any day of the week. The train crossed into Wyoming territory on the fifth day. The landscape had been changing gradually, the flat prairies of Nebraska rising into rolling hills, then steepening into foothills dusted with snow. But when they crossed the territorial line, something shifted dramatically. The hills became mountains, not the gentle tree-covered mountains of Pennsylvania that Margot knew from childhood picnics and Sunday drives, but massive jagged peaks that thrust upward from the earth like the bones of some enormous buried creature. Snow covered their upper reaches, blinding white against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The air coming through the train's windows was thinner here, colder, cleaner than any air Margot had ever breathed. It tasted of pine and stone and something wild and ancient that had no name. This is the frontier, Odette said, watching Margot's face as she stared out the window. Everything you knew before the rules, the expectations, the way things are supposed to be, leave them on this train. They will not serve you where you are going. Margot nodded. She was beginning to understand that the frontier was not just a place, but a condition, a stripping away of everything that was not essential. Out here, the things that mattered in Philadelphia, your family name, your social standing, which church you attended, whether your gloves matched your hat, none of it counted for anything. What counted was whether you could survive, whether you could adapt, whether you had the steel that Odette had seen in her buried beneath the manners, in the education, in the careful mask she had learned to wear in Judge Bramwell's house. On the morning of the sixth day, December 10th, exactly as planned, the train pulled into South Pass City. Margot stood at the window and looked out at the place that would either save her life or end it. The town was smaller than she had imagined, much smaller. A main street lined with wooden buildings weathered gray by wind and sun, their facades bearing painted signs that were already fading. A general store, a saloon, a post office, a livery stable, a church with a crooked steeple that leaned slightly to the east as if the Wyoming wind had been pushing against it for years and was slowly winning the argument. Mountains loomed in every direction, their peaks heavy with early winter snow. The air that hit Margot when she stepped onto the platform was so cold it felt like swallowing broken glass. Her lungs burned, her eyes watered. The moisture in her nose crystallized instantly, and she understood with sudden visceral clarity what Odette had meant about winters that could kill you. She stepped onto the platform with one small trunk containing everything she owned. 3 dresses, 2 nightgowns, her mother's ring on its chain around her neck, a Bible with her father's notes in the margins, 6 books she could not bear to leave behind, her father's signet ring in a velvet pouch, $200 minus the cost of her ticket hidden in a money belt beneath her corset. This was all she had. This was all she was. A 22-year-old woman standing on a wooden platform at the edge of civilization, shivering in a dress meant for Philadelphia autumns, not Wyoming winters, with dirt still under 2 of her fingernails. and a dead man's ring around her neck, and the memory of skulls grinning up at her from beneath the roses. Odette helped her with her trunk, lifting one end with the easy strength of a woman accustomed to hauling firewood and water and everything else that frontier life demanded. The post office is just there, she said, pointing to a squat building with a hand-painted sign that read U.S. Mail in letters that had once been red and were now a faded pink. You will want to let them know you have arrived. The Voss brothers have been checking in regularly from what I hear. Margot nodded. Her legs felt unsteady beneath her, and not just from 6 days of sitting on a train. The reality of what she was about to do was settling onto her shoulders with physical weight. She was about to meet 4 men she had never seen. She was about to marry them. All of them. In 2 days. The post office smelled of ink and wood smoke and the particular mustiness of paper that has been stored in a cold building. The clerk, a cheerful man with a red beard and spectacles that kept sliding down his nose, looked up from a ledger when she entered. Miss Pemberton, he said, and his face brightened with a grin so wide it pushed his spectacles even further down his nose. He pushed them back up with a practiced finger. The Voss brothers have been checking daily for news of your arrival. I believe they are out at the livery stable right now, preparing the wagon for the journey up to Dead Man's Canyon. Margot's heart stuttered. They are here already. Since yesterday morning, the clerk confirmed. Rode down from the canyon in the snow, spent the night at the livery because Mrs. Flanagan's boarding house was full up. He leaned forward conspiratorially, his voice dropping to a stage whisper that could probably be heard across the street. Between you and me, ma'am, I do not think they slept much. Nervous, maybe, though I have never seen a Voss brother look nervous about anything, and I have seen them face down a grizzly bear and a claim jumper in the same week. Are they? Margot paused, searching for the right question among the thousands crowding her mind. Are they what you expected? When you first met them, the clerk's grin widened even further, and he let out a short bark of laughter. Ma'am, nobody expects the Voss brothers. You think you know what you are walking into, and then you see them and your brain needs a minute to catch up with your eyes. But they are good men. Hard as the mountains they live in, rough around the edges, in ways that would give a Philadelphia debutante the vapors. But solid. Fair. Honest to a fault. You could do worse. You could do a whole lot worse. That seemed to be the consensus. You could do worse. It was not exactly a ringing endorsement, not exactly the kind of recommendation you would find in a society column or a matchmaker's portfolio. But it was better than buried in a garden. Anything was better than that. Odette walked with her toward the livery stable. The main street was quiet at this hour, just past mid-morning, with only a few people moving between buildings, their breath making white clouds in the frigid air. A dog slept on the porch of the general store, curled into a tight ball for warmth. Somewhere down the street, a blacksmith's hammer rang against an anvil, the sound carrying in the thin mountain air with a clarity that surprised Margot. Everything was clearer here. Sounds, smells, colors. As if the altitude had stripped away some invisible filter that dulled the senses in lower, warmer places. They turned the corner toward the livery stable, a large wooden building with a wide door that stood open despite the cold. The smell hit Margot first. Hay and horse and leather and manure and something else beneath all of that. Something masculine and wild that she could not name, but that made her heart beat faster in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Then she saw them. 4 men stood near a wagon just inside the stable entrance. They had been loading supplies, heavy sacks of flour and salt coils of rope, crates of ammunition, the provisions needed for a winter in the mountains. They had paused in their work when they heard footsteps on the frozen ground outside, and now they stood in a line 4 abreast, looking toward the door where Margot had appeared. And for a moment, Margot's mind could not process what she was seeing. They were identical. Perfectly, impossibly identical. The same face repeated 4 times like a photograph printed in quadruplicate. Same height, easily 6 feet and 7 inches, towering over the stable doors, over the horses, over everything in the building. Their heads nearly brushed the rafters, same broad shoulders that seemed to block out the pale winter light streaming through the open doors behind them. Same dark brown hair, though she noticed that one wore his slightly longer than the others, curling at his collar. Same jaw, square and strong, the kind of jaw that looked like it had been carved from the same granite as the mountains outside. Same cheekbones, high and sharp, casting shadows in the morning light. Same amber-colored eyes, not brown, not gold, but something in between the color of whiskey held up to firelight, the color of autumn leaves at their peak, that fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath stop in her chest. But it was more than their identical faces that stopped her. They had been working in the cold stable, and they had stripped down to their shirt sleeves despite the December chill. Their shirts were damp with sweat, the fabric clinging to massive chests and arms that spoke of years of physical labor. Not the carefully cultivated physiques of men who exercise for vanity, but the dense functional muscle of men who split wood and hauled water, and wrestled cattle and survived winters that would have killed lesser bodies. Scars marked their forearms and hands. Calluses thickened their palms. These were men whose bodies had been shaped by the same forces that shaped the landscape around them, hard and enduring and unapologetically powerful. Margot's gaze moved from one face to the next, trying to find differences, trying to anchor each man to something individual, something that would let her tell them apart. She found it in their eyes. Though the color was the same in all four, the expression behind that color was different in each. The first man's eyes were steady and commanding sign of someone accustomed to making decisions and having them obeyed. The second man's eyes held intensity and a barely contained energy like a fire burning behind amber glass. The third man's eyes were gentle, observant, seeing more than the others and saying less. And the fourth, the one with the slightly longer hair, his eyes danced with something playful and warm, as if the world amused him and he was in on a joke that no one else could hear. One of them set down the sack of flour he had been holding. The 50-pound bag dropped as casually as if it were a pillow and stepped forward. His hand extended toward her, and Margot noticed the scars. Rope burns on his forearms, white lines that crisscrossed the tanned skin like a map of past labors. A long scar across his ribs, visible where his shirt gaped open at the collar, the kind of scar left by a blade. Smaller marks on his knuckles, the evidence of fists meeting harder surfaces. These were hands that knew violence and work in equal measure, hands that could build and destroy with the same efficiency. Miss Pemberton. His voice was deep and rough like gravel being crushed beneath a boot. Not harsh, but textured. A voice that had been shaped by years of shouting orders over gunfire and wind and the vast silence of the mountains. I am Stellan. These are my brothers. Whitaker, we call him Wit. Dashiell, we call him Dash. And Remington, we call him Rem. Margot's hand disappeared completely in his when she shook it. Her entire hand from fingertip to wrist was engulfed by his palm. His skin was warm despite the cold, calloused in patterns that told stories she could not yet read, and his grip was careful, deliberate in its gentleness. The restraint of a man who knew exactly how much strength he possessed and chose consciously not to use it. She could feel the power held in check the way you can feel the current of a river even when the surface is calm. Mr. Voss, she managed her voice embarrassingly breathless. She was not a woman given to breathlessness. She had maintained her composure through her father's funeral, through her mother's remarriage, through the discovery of human remains in a rose garden. But these four men, their sheer physical presence, the weight of their combined attention focused entirely on her, made her feel like a candle flame in a windstorm. I thank you for your willingness to meet me. I am grateful for your consideration. The second brother Wit grinned. The expression transformed his face from something intimidating into something almost boyish, though there was nothing boyish about his body or the intensity that crackled behind his eyes like heat lightning. Do not scare her, Stellan. Ma'am, we are civilized, mostly. We eat with forks and everything, sometimes even the right fork if Rem remembers which side it goes on. The third brother, Dash, nodded respectfully. His expression was the gentlest of the four, though gentleness, on a face that size and that carved from hard angles was a relative term. Welcome, Miss Pemberton. We have prepared a room for you at Mrs. Flanagan's boarding house. You are safe here. That is the first thing I want you to know. Whatever brought you to us, you are safe now. And the fourth, Remington. He leaned against the wagon with his arms crossed over a chest that seemed as wide as the wagon itself. That playful gleam in his amber eyes catching the stable light and turning it warm. And if you decide we are too much to handle, we will pay your fare to California or anywhere else you want to go. No hard feelings, no questions, just a fresh start with our blessing. Margot forced her spine straight. She pulled her shoulders back. She lifted her chin and looked up at four faces that were looking down at her with a mixture of curiosity, caution, and something else. Something that might have been hope, though they were too proud and too careful to let hope show plainly on their features. "I am not going back," she said. "I made a promise, and I keep my promises." Something shifted in Stellan's amber eyes, a spark of something that had not been there before. Respect, maybe, or recognition? The look of a man who has been searching for something specific and suspects he may have found it, though he is too experienced to be certain yet. He leaned closer, not threateningly, not aggressively, but close enough that she could smell him. Wood smoke and clean sweat and pine resin and something indefinably male that she had no reference point for having spent her life in parlors and libraries and the antiseptic rooms where her father lay dying. His breath stirred the loose hair near her ear, warm in the freezing air. "Good," he said quietly so only she could hear. "Because once you are ours, we do not let go easy." Every nerve in Margot's body fired at once. Not fear, though fear was part of it. Something more complex than fear. An awareness of her own body that she had never experienced before, a sudden startling consciousness of her own heartbeat, her own breathing, the blood moving through her veins. She felt simultaneously very small and very alive, like a match that has just been struck the instant before the flame catches. Odette touched her arm gently. "Come on, dear. Let us get you settled. You need rest before tomorrow. And a hot meal. You look like you have not eaten properly in a week, which you probably have not knowing trained food." Margot let herself be led away one step and then another, her legs carrying her body, while her mind tried to process what had just happened. She felt four pairs of amber eyes following her out of the stable, tracking her movement with the steady, patient attention of men who had spent years watching the horizon for threats and opportunities. Watching, waiting. She had crossed 2,000 miles. She had left behind a city, a mother and a fiancé, who buried his wives beneath roses. She had arrived in a town at the edge of civilization with one small trunk and the hope that four strangers would be better than one monster. And now walking down the frozen main street of South Pass City with Odette's steady hand on her arm and the Wyoming mountains rising like sentinels all around her, Margot understood something she had not understood before. This was not the end of her journey. This was not even the middle. This was the beginning of a story she could not yet see, the shape of a story written in a language she had not yet learned. Tomorrow she would marry them, all four of them. And the day after that, a new life would begin. A life in a canyon named after the dead, with four men who had promised to protect her with their lives. Whether they could keep that promise, whether any man could keep such a promise, in a land this wild and unforgiving, remained to be seen. But Margot Pemberton had dug up skulls with her bare hands and survived. She had read a killer's confession and kept her composure. She had stolen back her inheritance, boarded a train into the unknown, and walked into a stable full of giants without flinching. Whatever came next, she would face it the same way. Spine straight, eyes open, steel hidden beneath the surface waiting to be drawn. That night alone in the small room at Odette's boarding house, Margot sat on the narrow bed and listened to the Wyoming wind howling outside the window. It sounded like a woman screaming, just as Odette had said it would. But Margot did not flinch at the sound. She had heard worse. She had heard the crack of a shovel striking bone. She had heard the silence of a garden that kept its secrets for years. She opened her father's Bible to the page he had marked with via ribbon, a passage from Isaiah that he had underlined in his careful hand. "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." Margot pressed the Bible to her chest. She closed her eyes. And for the first time since Philadelphia, she slept without dreaming of roses. Tomorrow, everything would change. She was ready. The morning of her wedding dawned cold and clear, the kind of December morning that exists only in the high mountains, where the air is so sharp it feels like breathing crystal, and the sky is a blue so deep it looks like it might shatter if you touched it. Margot woke before sunrise, her stomach twisted into knots so tight she could feel them in her spine. She lay in the narrow bed at Odette's boarding house and listened to the sounds of South Pass City coming to life around her. A rooster crowing somewhere down the street. The distant clang of the blacksmith starting his morning fire. Footsteps on the boardwalk below her window, the heavy tread of men heading to work in the cold. Odette brought her breakfast. Eggs scrambled with dried herbs, toast made from bread she had baked the night before, a cup of coffee so strong it could have dissolved the spoon. Margot could not eat. She picked at the eggs, tore the toast into small pieces, drank the coffee because it was warm, and her hands were shaking and she needed something to hold. "Are you certain about this?" Odette asked as she helped Margot dress, buttoning the cream-colored gown that was the nicest thing she owned. Simple fabric with lace at the collar and cuffs meant for Sunday services in Philadelphia, not weddings in Wyoming. But it was clean and it fit, and it was hers, and that would have to be enough. "I am certain I cannot go back," Margot replied. "That is as certain as I can be about anything right now." Odette nodded and pinned the last curl into place. She stepped back and studied Margot in the small mirror that hung on the wall, tilting her head, the way an artist studies a painting that is almost finished. "Then you will do fine. The Voss boys are good men. Hard, yes, stubborn as the mountains they live in. But good, they will take care of you." Margot met her own eyes in the mirror. The face that looked back at her was thinner than it had been a month ago, the cheekbones sharper, the eyes wider and darker with everything they had seen. She did not look like a bride, she looked like a survivor, and perhaps she thought that was more appropriate for what she was about to do. The walk to the chapel took 3 minutes. 3 minutes that felt like 3 hours, each step carrying her closer to a threshold she could not uncross. The chapel was not really a chapel at all. It was an old prospector's shack that Reverend Hollis Birch had converted for Sunday services, adding a rough-hewn altar made from a sawmill table and simple wooden pews that seated maybe 20 people if they did not mind sitting close. The windows were small and let in more wind than light, and the walls were chinked with mud that crumbled when the temperature dropped, which in December in Wyoming was always. 4 men waited at the altar. They had cleaned up for the occasion, and the transformation was startling. Shirts buttoned to the collar, though the fabric strained across their massive shoulders and chests, as if the garments were fighting a losing battle against the bodies they were meant to contain. Hair combed back from their faces, still damp from washing. Freshly shaved, revealing the full architecture of their jaws and cheekbones, the sharp planes of faces that had been sculpted by genetics and hardened by weather and war. They were beautiful. Margot had not expected that word to apply to men who looked like they could tear a log apart with their bare hands, but there it was. Beautiful the way mountains are beautiful, the way storms are beautiful, the way anything vast and powerful and indifferent to your opinion of it is beautiful. Stellan stood in the center, flanked by his brothers on either side. As Margot walked down the short aisle, Odette beside her, because there was no father to give her away, and Odette had appointed herself to the role without being asked, all 4 brothers turned to watch her approach, 8 amber eyes tracking her every step. The weight of their combined attention pressed against her like something physical, like wind or gravity or the pressure of deep water. Her knees felt weak. Her hands trembled around the small bouquet of winter wildflowers that Odette had gathered that morning from the hillside behind the boarding house. Tiny purple and white blooms already wilting in the cold air. Brave little flowers that had no business blooming in December, but had done so anyway because nobody had told them they could not. Reverend Birch smiled kindly as she reached the altar. He was a small man, which made him look even smaller, standing between the Voss brothers like a sparrow perched between eagles. His Bible was old and well-worn, its leather cover soft from years of handling pages marked with ribbons and scraps of paper. "Dearly beloved," he began, then paused. He looked at the 4 men, then at Margot, then back at the 4 men. His expression was one of practiced composure that was being tested to its limits. "This is an uncommon ceremony, I will not pretend otherwise. But before the witnesses gathered here, and in the eyes of the Lord, we join this woman to these men in holy matrimony." He cleared his throat. "The law recognizes only one legal union. Stellan Voss will sign the marriage certificate as the legal husband. But in the sight of God in this community, Margot Ellison Pemberton is binding herself to all 4 Voss brothers equally. Do you all understand and accept this?" "We do." 4 voices said it in unison, and the sound rolled through the small chapel like thunder echoing off canyon walls. Margot felt it in her chest, felt the vibration of those 2 words spoken by 4 identical voices at the same moment, and something shifted inside her. Something settled. Not certainty exactly, but the absence of the worst kind of doubt. These men meant what they said. She could hear it in the way their voices blended into one four notes forming a single chord. Miss Pemberton, the Reverend continued, do you take these four men as your lawfully wedded husbands, to honor and to cherish, in sickness and in health, for as long as you all shall live? Margot looked at each of them in turn, Stellan stern and commanding, his amber eyes steady as bedrock. Wit intense, but with that unexpected warmth flickering behind his gaze like embers waiting for wind. Dash gentle despite his size, his expression promising safety in a world that had given her none. And Remington, the youngest by 3 minutes, his cocky grin softened now into something more vulnerable, more hopeful, as if he alone among the brothers was willing to let her see how much this moment meant to him. I do, she said, and her voice did not shake. Then let us hear your vows, the Reverend said. Stellan, you may begin. Stellan took her hands in his. Both of them, her hands vanishing completely inside his grasp, swallowed by calloused palms and thick fingers that could have crushed every bone in her hands without effort. Instead, they held her with the careful precision of a man handling something irreplaceable. Margot Ellison Pemberton, he said, his rough voice dropping to a register that seemed meant only for her. I vow to protect you with my life, to provide for you in all things, to honor you as my partner and my equal. Whatever darkness follows you here, it will have to come through me first, and I do not fall easily. Wit stepped forward next, taking her hands from Stellan with a gentleness that contradicted the fire in his eyes. I vow to treasure you, to fight for you when fighting is needed, and to make you laugh when the fighting is done, to stand between you and any storm, whether it comes from outside or from within. Dash's turn. His hands cradled hers like he was holding a wounded bird, firm enough to protect, but careful not to press too hard. I vow to heal you when you are hurt, to hold you when you are frightened, to love you in sickness and in health, and in all the gray spaces between. I have spent my life learning to mend what is broken. You are not broken, Margot, but whatever scars you carry, I will tend them. And finally, Remington, he took her hands and kissed her knuckles, jaws, a gesture so gallant and unexpected from a man his size that Margot heard Odette make a soft sound behind her. I vow to make you smile even when the world is dark, to build you beautiful things and fill our home with warmth, to remind you every single day that you chose us and that choosing us was the bravest and best thing anyone has ever done. Margot blinked back tears. She would not cry at her own wedding. She would not. And do you, Margot, have vows for your husbands? She swallowed hard. The words she had prepared the night before, lying awake in Odette's boarding house, listening to the wind, came back to her now. Simple words, true words, the only kind that mattered. I vow to stand with you, all four of you, to trust you with my safety and my heart, to learn what you teach me, to be worthy of the sacrifice you are making by choosing someone you have never met, someone who comes to you with nothing but her word and her willingness. I do not know if I can love four men equally, but I vow to try with everything I have. Stellan's amber eyes darkened at the word sacrifice, and she saw something move across his face that she could not quite read. Not displeasure, something deeper, recognition perhaps. The understanding that she saw their offer not as a privilege she was receiving, but as a risk they were all taking together. Then, by the power vested in me, Reverend Birch said, his voice cracking slightly on the word power, I pronounce you husband and wife. He paused, glanced at the four towering men, and corrected himself. Husbands, you may kiss your bride. Stellan solved the problem of precedence by cupping Margot's face in both hands. His palms were rough and warm against her cheeks, his grip firm, but infinitely careful. He had to bend nearly double because of their height difference, and something about the giant of a man folding himself down to reach her, made Margot's heart clench in a way she had not anticipated. His lips pressed to hers, warm and sure. Her first kiss, and it tasted of coffee and cold air, and something else, something that was simply him. It lasted only a moment, but in that moment Margot felt the ground shift beneath her feet in a way that had nothing to do with the crooked floorboards of the chapel. Wit was next. His kiss was briefer, but fiercer, a quick press of his mouth to hers that communicated urgency and barely contained emotion. He pulled back with his jaw clenched, as if he did not trust himself with more. Dash kissed her forehead first, then her lips, a sequence that felt like a benediction followed by a promise. Gentle, reverent. The kiss of a man who understood that tenderness was its own kind of strength. Remington winked before kissing her. His lips curved into a smile against hers, and when he pulled back, his amber eyes were bright. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Voss, all four of us." Reverend Orge cleared his throat. "Congratulations. May God bless this union." The handful of townspeople who had come to witness the unusual ceremony applauded. Odette was crying openly, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief she had embroidered with blue flowers that matched her boarding house door. And Margot, standing at the altar, surrounded by four men whose combined presence seemed to occupy every inch of the small chapel, felt something she had not felt since before her father died. Something dangerous and wonderful and terrifying in its fragility. Hope. The journey to Dead Man's Canyon took 6 hours by wagon. 6 hours of climbing into the mountains on a road that was less a road than a suggestion carved into the mountainside by years of wagon wheels and determination. The trees thickened as they gained altitude, ponderosa pine and Douglas fir pressing close on either side, their branches heavy with snow that occasionally released and fell to the ground with soft, muffled sounds like the earth sighing in its sleep. Margot sat on the bench seat between Stellan and Whit with Dash and Remington in the back, among the supplies. The cold deepened with every mile seeping through her coat and dress and the 3 layers of underclothing she had put on that morning. But the body heat radiating from the 2 men on either side of her was extraordinary, like sitting between 2 furnaces. She found herself leaning slightly toward Stellan, then correcting herself and leaning toward Whit, then giving up and simply letting their warmth envelop her from both sides. Nobody spoke much during the first hour. The horses labored up the steep grade, their breath making enormous white clouds that hung in the still air like ghosts. The only sounds were the creak of the wagon, the jingle of harness, and the occasional crack of a branch breaking under its load of snow. Then Stellan spoke without looking at her. "You have not told us what you are running from." Margot stiffened. "I mentioned desperate circumstances in my letter." "You did. But circumstances is a word that covers a lot of ground. We are taking you into our home, Margot, into our family. We deserve to know what might follow you here." She was quiet for a long time. The wagon climbed higher, the air grew thinner. The trees grew taller, their trunks thicker, as if the forest itself was closing ranks around them, protecting them from whatever lay below. Then she told them. She told them about her father's death and her mother's remarriage, about Judge Bramwell and his son Oswin, about the garden, the skulls, the locket with the young bride's photograph, the ring inscribed with eternal love, the journal behind the Dante's Inferno, and the entries written in the precise handwriting of a man who documented his murders the way a gardener documents his plantings. By the time she finished, the wagon had stopped. Stellan had pulled the horses up without her noticing, his hands motionless on the reins. The silence that followed her story was enormous, pressing in from all sides, filling the space between the trees and the mountains and the sky. In the back of the wagon, Dash had gone very still. His medic's instincts had kicked in during her telling, his trained eyes cataloging the signs of trauma, the way they would catalog symptoms in a wounded man. The slight tremor in her hands. The way her voice had gone flat and factual when she described the skulls, the emotional detachment of someone who had learned to separate the horror from the telling of it, because feeling it fully would destroy her. Whit's fists were clenched in his lap, the knuckles white. His jaw worked back and forth as if he were grinding his teeth to powder. The fire behind his amber eyes had turned into something hotter, something that looked like it could burn through walls. Remington had stopped smiling. For the first time since she had met him, his face held no trace of his characteristic playfulness. In its place was something raw and fierce, something that transformed his boyish features into the face of a man who was capable of violence and was considering it seriously. And Stellan. Stellan simply sat with the reins slack in his hands and stared straight ahead at the mountain road. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, controlled. The voice of a man who had learned long ago that the most dangerous anger was the kind that did not shout. "Oswin Bramwell," he said. "That is his name." "Yes, and his father, Judge Aldrich Bramwell." "They know you took the money and ran." "They must by now," Margot said. "My mother would have discovered my absence the morning after I left. The judge would have checked his safe. Would they follow you? I do not know. The judge has resources, connections in the legal system across multiple states. If he wanted to find me, he could. But whether he would travel this far, I cannot say. Stellan picked up the reins, clicked his tongue to start the horses moving again. Then we prepare for the possibility. No one touches you, Margot. Not Bramwell, not his son, not anyone. You are under our protection now, and our protection is not a figure of speech. The cabin appeared as the sun began to set, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and rose that looked like something from a painting. The structure was nestled against the mountain face, sheltered from the worst of the wind by a natural overhang of rock. It was larger than Margot had expected, solid log walls chinked with clay. A stone chimney already trailing smoke where Dash had ridden ahead on horseback to start the fire. Real glass windows, a luxury in the territories. A covered porch with a rocking chair that looked hand-carved, the armrests shaped into the heads of horses. Remington made that, Stellan said, noticing her gaze. He builds things, furniture, carvings, anything he can get his hands on. The boy has a gift, Homewit said softly as he helped her down from the wagon. His hands spanned her waist completely, and he lifted her to the ground as easily as if she weighed no more than a sack of flour. You are home now, Margot. Inside the cabin was warm and smelled of wood smoke and pine and the stew that Dash was already heating over the fire. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, the hearth wide enough to sit inside. A sturdy table with 5 chairs. 5 they had already built one for her, shelves lined with books, furs covering the floor, hand-carved details everywhere she looked. A bear on the mantelpiece, an eagle above the door, a horse on the window ledge. All Remington's work, she realized. He had filled this rough cabin with beauty because beauty was what he knew how to give. Those first weeks were a revelation. Margot had expected hardship, and there was plenty of it. The cold alone was an education. Temperatures that plunged to 20, 30, sometimes 40 degrees below zero. Wind that screamed through the canyon with a fury that rattled the windows and made the cabin walls groan. Snow that fell in quantities she had not believed possible, burying the world in white silence. But within that hardship, she found something she had not expected. A rhythm, a purpose, a life that made sense in ways her Philadelphia existence never had. Each brother taught her something different, and in teaching her, they revealed themselves. Stellan taught her to shoot. He was patient in a way that surprised her, given his stern demeanor. He stood behind her, adjusting her stance, correcting her grip, his massive hands guiding her smaller ones, with the precision of a man who understood that this was not recreation but survival. When she hit the target for the first time, a tin can at 50 yards, he said nothing, just nodded once. But the pride in his amber eyes was worth more than any words. Whit taught her to ride. He put her on the gentlest horse they owned, a mare named Penny, who was older than all 4 brothers combined and had the temperament of a Sunday school teacher. On the 3rd day, Margot fell. Not badly, just a tumble into a snowbank when Penny shied at a rabbit. Whit was off his horse and at her side before she finished falling, his strong arms hauling her out of the snow, his face tight with worry. Margot looked up at him, covered in snow, her hair in her eyes, and she laughed. She laughed for the first time since Philadelphia, a real laugh that came from somewhere deep inside her chest, and the sound of it stopped. Whit cold. He stared at her with his mouth slightly open, and then he laughed too, a deep rolling sound that echoed off the canyon walls and startled birds from the trees. Dash taught her about healing. He showed her the herbs that grew wild even in winter if you knew where to look. Yarrow for wounds, willow bark for pain, sage for purifying. He taught her to set a splint clean, a wound, recognize the signs of frostbite before the damage became permanent. His teaching style was gentle and methodical, the style of a man who had learned medicine on battlefields where there was no room for error, and every lesson was written in blood. And Remington taught her that beauty existed even in the harshest places if you knew how to see it. He sketched her portrait one evening by firelight, his charcoal moving across the paper with quick, confident strokes, while she sat in the rocking chair he had carved, reading one of the books from the shelf. When he finished, he turned the paper toward her. She stared at it. The woman in the drawing was not the woman in the Philadelphia portrait. The Philadelphia woman had been careful, composed, neutral, a mask worn for a camera. The woman Remington had drawn was different. She was laughing slightly, her eyes bright, her hair loose around her shoulders, her expression open and unguarded. She looked alive in a way the photograph never had. This is you, Remington said quietly. This is who we see. Margot touched the edge of the paper, her fingers trembling. No one had ever drawn her before. No one had ever looked at her closely enough to capture what lay beneath the surface. She realized with a shock that brought tears to her eyes that this was the first time anyone had seen the real Margot. Not the dutiful daughter, not the obedient fiancé, not the frightened girl running from a monster. Just Margot, herself, complete and imperfect and real. That night, after the drawings were put away and the fire banked for the night, Stellan took her hands across the table and spoke to her about what their marriage meant. He was direct as always, laying out the arrangement with the blunt clarity of a military briefing. She would share their bed. All of them. He would never force her, none of them would. But he needed her to understand that this family worked because they shared everything equally, and that included her presence, her affection, and her trust. Margot listened. She asked her questions plainly. She set her conditions, gentleness when she needed it, respect always. Her voice heard equally with theirs. If she said stop, they stopped. No exceptions. Agreed, 4 voices said in unison. That night, the fire burned low in the great stone hearth, and the wind howled outside the cabin walls, and Margot learned that her body was capable of feeling things she had never imagined. 4 men kept their promises. They were gentle. They were patient. They showed her that intimacy did not have to mean fear, that surrender did not have to mean loss, that trust given freely could be honored completely. She fell asleep that night, surrounded by warmth, her head on Stellan's chest, Whit's arm draped across her waist, Dash's hand holding hers, Remington's steady breathing somewhere close in the darkness. For the first time since her father died, she felt safe. And in the weeks that followed, she fell in love. Not all at once, not with a single dramatic moment, but gradually the way dawn comes to the mountains. A slow brightening that you do not notice until suddenly the world is full of light, and you cannot remember what darkness looked like. Christmas came, their first together. Remington carved her a wooden horse so finely detailed she could see the individual hairs in its mane. Dash gave her a leather-bound journal filled with pressed herbs and their medicinal uses, each one labeled in his careful handwriting. Whit presented her with a pair of riding gloves he had sewn himself, the stitching uneven, and the fingers slightly different lengths but lined with rabbit fur so soft she gasped when she put them on. And Stellan gave her a revolver, small enough to fit her hand, its grip carved from walnut, its barrel polished to a mirror shine. For protection, he said simply, "You are one of us now. You should be armed like one of us." Margot held the gun in one hand and the wooden horse in the other, and she looked at these 4 men who had taken her in, who had married her sight unseen, who had given her a home and a family and a reason to stop being afraid. And she said the words she had been holding back for weeks, the words she had been afraid to say, because saying them made them real and real things could be taken away. "I love you," she said. "All 4 of you, equally and completely and without reservation." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full. Full of 4 men looking at a woman who had given them the one thing they had not dared to ask for. Then the silence broke, and it broke with signs of danger. It began with small things. Hoofprints in the snow near their property line that did not belong to any horse they knew. A stranger asking questions at the general store in South Pass City, a well-dressed man from back east who inquired about a young blonde woman who might have passed through recently. A message from Odette delivered by a trusted rider warning them that someone from Philadelphia was in town making inquiries. Stellan doubled the watch. He and his brothers took turns patrolling the perimeter of their land through the night, 4-hour shifts in the freezing darkness, rifles across their laps, amber eyes scanning the tree line for movement. Remington rigged warning lines around the cabin, thin ropes stretched between trees at ankle height, attached to tin cans filled with pebbles. A crude alarm system, but effective. Anyone approaching the cabin in the dark would announce themselves whether they intended to or not. Margot's shooting lessons intensified. What had been a daily exercise became a twice-daily discipline. Stellan pushed her hard, demanding accuracy at increasing distances in different light conditions in different weather. She complained once on a morning when the temperature was so far below zero that her eyelashes froze together between shots. "Why do I need to hit a target at 200 yards?" she asked, her teeth chattering so hard the words came out in pieces. "If someone is that far away, they are not a threat." Stellan looked at her with those steady amber eyes. "If someone is that far away and has a rifle, they are absolutely a threat. You shoot at 200 yards, so that when you need to shoot at 50, your hands do not shake. She did not complain again. Then one frozen morning in early January, the warning came that they had been dreading. Odette's rider arrived at dawn, his horse lathered and blowing ice crystals clinging to its mane. The rider himself was half frozen, his lips blue, his fingers so numb he could barely hold the reins. He carried a note written in Odette's firm hand. Judge Bramwell arrived in South Pass City yesterday, not alone, met with Dorian Lockridge at the saloon. They talked for 3 hours. Bramwell has money and legal papers claiming Margot stole from him and is a fugitive. Lockridge has men, at least 50 riders from his ranch. They are planning something. Get ready. God be with you. Stellan read the note aloud. The cabin went silent. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind pushed snow against the windows, with a sound like sand against glass. Bramwell and Lockridge Witt set his voice tight with a fury that seemed to compress the air around him. The judge who buried women under roses and the cattle baron who treated men like slaves. A match made in hell. How did they find each other? Dash asked. Does not matter, Stellan replied. What matters is they have. Bramwell wants Margot back. Lockridge wants revenge for us walking away from his ranch 3 years ago. Together they have legal cover and firepower. Separately, they are dangerous. Together, they are a war. Margot stood in the center of the cabin with Stellan's revolver in her hand, the beautiful walnut-grubbed gun he had given her for Christmas. Her face was pale, but her hand was steady. She had been afraid before. In the garden, on the train, at the altar. But this was different. This was not fear for herself alone. This was fear for the 4 men who had given her everything, who had shown her what love looked like when it was real and unafraid, and shared equally among people who meant their vows. What do we do? She asked. We prepare, Stellan said. And if they come, we fight. They came 3 days later. The gunshot that shattered the dawn was followed by 50 more within seconds. Margot was ripped from sleep by the sound, a sound she had never heard before, but recognized instantly from Stellan's descriptions of combat. Not a single report, but a volley, a wall of sound that hit the cabin like a physical force, shattering the east window and sending shards of glass spinning through the air like tiny knives. Stellan was out of bed with his rifle before his eyes fully opened. Witt grabbed weapons from the rack by the door. Dash pulled Margot behind the stone fireplace, the thickest wall in the cabin, shielding her with his body. Remington was already at the south window, peering through a gap in the shutters. 50 riders, he reported, his voice calm in a way that chilled Margot more than the gunfire. Maybe more. Coming from the south and east. Torches and rifles. 2 men at the front. One has a scar across his face. Dorian Lockridge, Stellan said grimly, taking his position at the north window. And the other one, Remington continued, is wearing a traveling coat that costs more than everything we own combined. Old man and with white hair and a face like a hanging judge. Because he is one, Margot whispered. Aldrich Bramwell, he found me. Through the broken window, Judge Bramwell's voice carried across the snow with the practiced projection of a man accustomed to commanding courtrooms. Rosalind Pemberton, I have a warrant for your arrest. You stole from my household. Come out peacefully and submit to the authority of the law. His voice was calm, reasonable. The voice of civilization reaching into the wilderness to reclaim what it believed it owned. But Margot had heard that voice before in his study on the night she crept past his door on her way to the safe. She had heard it say perfectly reasonable things while his son buried women in the garden outside. Civilization and cruelty wore the same face in the Bramwell household. I would rather die than go back. Margot shouted through the broken window, her voice raw with a fury that surprised even her. You know what your son did? You helped him dig the graves. The silence that followed her accusation lasted only a heartbeat. Then Dorian Lockridge's voice replaced the judge's, younger and harder, and carrying the particular edge of a man who enjoyed what was about to happen. Voss, send the girl out and we will let you live. This is between us and her. You do not need to die for some Philadelphia runaway. Stellan's response was a rifle shot that took the hat off the head of the nearest rider. The man's horse reared, nearly throwing him. The message was clear. The next shot would not be aimed at a hat. Nobody takes my wife, Stellan said, working the bolt of his rifle with the smooth efficiency of a man who had done it 10,000 times. Nobody. The siege began. Witt fired from the south window, dropping 2 riders in the first minute. with shots so precise they seemed impossible given the chaos. Return fire grazed his shoulder, blood blooming through his shirt in a dark stain that spread with alarming speed. He glanced down at it, grunted, and kept shooting. "They are trying to flank," he shouted, adjusting his position as bullets thudded into the log walls around the window frame. Dash at the east window was methodical, almost clinical. Each shot deliberately placed. 7 down, he counted aloud. 45 to go, maybe more. A bullet hit the window frame inches from his head, spraying splinters that cut his cheek. He wiped blood away with his sleeve and continued firing. Remington watched the west approach the direction where the canyon narrowed to a choke point that could be held by one man if that man was willing to die holding it. Stellan, he called, his voice carrying that strange calm that had nothing to do with peace and everything to do with a man who has already made his decision. "They are sending men to cut the rope corral. They want our horses. Without horses, we cannot run." Margot, Stellan commanded, "Take the west window. Anyone who touches those ropes, you drop them." Margot moved to the window. Her hands were steady. She sighted down the barrel of her rifle the way Stellan had taught her, breathing, slowly finding the calm center that exists even in the middle of chaos. A man was running toward the rope corral with a knife in his hand, bent low against the expected gunfire. She fired. The man fell. The knife spun from his hand and landed in the snow. Margot turned from the window and vomited. Then she wiped her mouth, returned to the window, and shot 2 more men who tried the same approach. The siege wore on through the morning and into the afternoon. Hours of gunfire that left the cabin walls pockmarked with bullet holes and the floor covered in shell casings and broken glass. By midday, Whit had taken a second bullet, this one deep in his shoulder. Real damage. His left arm hung useless at his side, and his face had gone the color of old paper. Dash worked on him behind the fireplace while the others covered. "Bullet is still in," he reported, his medic's hands probing the wound with practiced efficiency despite the chaos around them. "Needs to come out, but not here, not now. I can slow the bleeding, but he needs surgery." Later, Whit growled through gritted teeth, his right hand still gripping his rifle. "Keep fighting." Then Dorian Lockridge played his second card. Through the south window, Remington spotted riders upstream above the cabin on the ridge, where the creek that provided their only water source tumbled down from the higher elevations. They were dragging something. Animal carcasses. Dead cattle, bloated and rotting despite the cold, hauled up from somewhere on Lockridge's range. "They are poisoning the creek," Remington reported, his comm finally cracking. "Dumping dead cattle upstream. Our water supply will be contaminated within hours." Stellan cursed, the first time Margot had ever heard him use profanity. Without water, they could hold the cabin for 2 days at most. 3 if they melted snow, but melting snow required fire, and fire required wood, and their wood pile was outside, exposed to the attackers' rifles. They could not stay. They could not leave. The ammunition was running low, perhaps 50 rounds left. Whit was losing blood, and now their water was being poisoned. The trap was closing. Stellan counted rounds, counted men, counted the hours until dark. The math was simple and brutal. They were outnumbered 10 to 1 with a wounded man and a dwindling supply of everything they needed to survive. By morning, they would be out of ammunition. By the following day, out of clean water. By the day after that, dead. Unless. He looked at the ridge above the canyon. 6 months earlier, he and his brothers had placed dynamite charges along the ridgeline as a last resort defense. An avalanche plan. If the charges were detonated, they would bring down the entire slope, thousands of tons of snow and rock that would bury the canyon floor and everything on it, including most of Lockridge's men. The detonator sat in a wooden box on the ridge, 200 yards of open ground from the cabin door. No cover, no protection, just 200 yards of snow and the rifles of 50 men. The avalanche, Remington said quietly. He had been watching Stellan's eyes move to the ridge and back, reading his brother's thoughts the way he always could, the way all 4 of them could read each other. "It is our only chance," No, Stellan said. "We find another way." "There is no other way, brother." Remington's voice was calm, too calm. That terrible calm that Margot was learning to recognize as the sound of a man who has stopped being afraid because he has accepted what comes next. If they breach the cabin, Margot dies. We all die. The dynamite will bury most of them. The avalanche will fill the canyon. It will give you three a chance to get out. You three, not you four. Margot heard the distinction and felt her blood turn to ice. Rem, no, she said. She crossed the cabin in 3 steps and grabbed his shirt, fisting the fabric so hard, her knuckles went white. There has to be another way. Please, we can wait until dark. We can. He kissed her. Not playfully, not with the cocky grin that was his trademark. He kissed her with everything he had, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other pressed flat against her spine, pulling her against him as if he could memorize the feel of her body through sheer force of will. When he pulled back, his amber eyes were bright with tears he would not shed. Tell them I love them, he said. Tell all of them. To his brothers, he turned and looked at each of them in turn. Stellan, Wit, Dash. 3 identical faces looking back at him, 3 pairs of amber eyes that held the same understanding, the same grief, the same terrible pride. Take care of her, he said. Take care of each other. Rem Stellan started, in his voice, that iron voice that had never broken, cracked like a beam under too much weight. You would do the same for me, Remington said simply. Any of us would. That is what brothers do. He was gone before Stellan could stop him. Through the door and into the open, running through the snow toward the ridge, his long legs eating the distance in strides that threw up white spray behind him. Stellan covered him. Every shot counted. Every bullet found its mark, dropping men who turned their rifles toward the running figure. Wit fired one, handed his wounded shoulder, pouring blood. His jaw locked so tight the muscles stood out like cords, refusing to stop shooting until his brother was safe. Margot screamed Remington's name and fired at anyone who got close, her vision blurred by tears she could no longer hold back. Remington ran in zigzags the way soldiers run when crossing open ground under fire. A bullet clipped his leg and he stumbled, went down on one knee in the snow, pushed himself back up, and kept running. Another hit his side, a spray of red against the white, and he staggered but did not fall. 100 yards, 50 yards, a shot to the thigh that spun him sideways, and for one terrible moment Margot thought he was down for good. But he was not. He was not down. He was crawling now, dragging himself through the snow with his arms, leaving a trail of red behind him, and he was still moving, still fighting, still going. He reached the ridge. Through the rifle scope, Stellan watched his brother open the detonator box, watched his hands move over the mechanism, watched his face change from determination to horror as he saw what the stray bullets from the battle below had done. The fuse wire had been severed, cut by a bullet that had struck the box sometime during the siege. There was only one option left. Light the fuse manually. Hold a match to the raw end of the dynamite cord and let the fire travel the 3 feet to the charges. 3 feet of fuse. Perhaps 5 seconds of burn time. Not enough time to run. Not enough time to do anything except stand there and wait for the mountain to come apart beneath your feet. No escape. Remington looked back at the cabin one last time. His eyes found Stellan's through the scope. 200 yards of distance between them, but the brothers who had shared a face since birth needed no words. They had never needed words. Remington smiled. That cocky, beautiful, heartbreaking smile that had been his signature since he was a boy of 10, grinning his way out of trouble, grinning his way through hardship, grinning at the world because grinning was the only language he knew for saying, I am here and I am alive and I am not afraid. He struck the match. Stellan screamed his brother's name. The sound tore from him like something alive being ripped from his chest, a sound that was not a word but a wound made audible. He screamed it so loud, the mountains should have heard so loud, the sky should have cracked open and stopped what was about to happen. The fuse caught. The fire raced along the cord. 3 feet. 5 seconds. Remington closed his eyes. Perhaps he was thinking of Margot's laugh. Perhaps he was thinking of the drawings he had made, all those portraits of a woman who had found herself in his careful charcoal lines. Perhaps he was thinking of his brother's 3 men with his face who would carry the shape of this moment for the rest of their lives. The explosion was beyond comprehension. The entire ridge disintegrated. The mountain came apart in a roar that drowned out every other sound in the world, a sound so enormous it seemed to swallow sound itself, leaving a silence inside the noise that was more terrifying than the noise. Tons of snow and rock cascaded down the slope in a white wave that moved faster than a galloping horse, faster than thought, faster than prayer. It buried the attackers. Dorian Lockridge on his black horse turning to flee, Too slow, swallowed by the white wall. Judge Aldrich Bramwell standing in his expensive traveling coat, with his mouth open in a scream no one would ever hear. 40 men, 50 men, horses and rifles, and torches, all of it disappearing beneath the avalanche like toys swept from a table. And Remington. Remington, who had carved horses from wood and drawn portraits by firelight, and kissed his wife with a grin, and given his brothers everything he had every day without counting the cost. Remington was gone. The shockwave hit the cabin, the roof partially collapsed, heavy timbers crashing down in a shower of dust and debris. Windows that had survived the gunfire shattered in their frames. All of them were thrown to the floor. Margot screamed until her throat gave out a sound that was not grief yet, but something that preceded grief, something animal and raw, that came from a place deeper than language. Then silence. Absolute crushing silence. No gunfire, no shouting, no wind, just the settling of snow and the soft, terrible sound of Margot's sobs. Stellan crawled to the window. Where Dead Man's Canyon had been, there was now a flat, white plain stretching in every direction. No bodies visible. No horses. No canyon walls. Everything buried under 30 feet of snow and rock, including his brother. He held Margot as she broke apart his arms, wrapped around her shaking body, his own tears falling silently into her hair. Whit sat against the wall with his wounded shoulder, his face carved from stone, his eyes fixed on the place where the ridge had been, where his brother had stood, where his brother had smiled. Dash's tears cut tracks through the dust and blood on his face. He did not wipe them away. He let them fall because some tears are not meant to be hidden. Some tears are the only honest response to a world that takes the best of us first. They had lost their brother. They had lost the youngest, the artist, the one who found beauty in everything, the one who built things and drew things and smiled at the darkness until the darkness blinked first. But they were alive, because Remington Voss had given his life so they could keep theirs. The cabin was buried, 20 feet of snow pressing against the walls, sealing the doors, covering the windows. The partially collapsed roof let in thin shafts of gray light that illuminated the destruction inside. Overturned furniture, shattered glass, spent shell casings rolling across the tilted floor. Whit's blood pooling in the low spots. Air grew thin, temperature dropped. They were trapped in near-total darkness, a tomb of snow and timber, with one candle left and no way to know if anyone was coming to dig them out. Stellan took command because that was what he did. Because leadership was not something he chose, but something that chose him, the way water chooses the path downhill naturally and without deliberation. "Listen to me," he said. "We are alive. We stay alive. That is the mission. That is the only mission. Everything else is details." He assessed the situation with the cold efficiency of a man who had survived worse odds and knew that panic was a luxury they could not afford. Whit's shoulder wound was serious, still bleeding, the bullet still embedded in the muscle. Dash had cuts from shattered glass on his face and hands, none deep enough to be dangerous, but all bleeding freely. Rosa was physically uninjured, but in shock, her eyes wide, and unseeing, her body trembling with a violence that had nothing to do with the cold. Stellan himself had bruised ribs from a falling beam that made every breath feel like being stabbed. "We dig through the stovepipe," he ordered. "Follow the chimney upward. Create an air shaft first, then widen it enough to crawl through. Whit, you rest. Do not argue. You have lost too much blood. Dash, treat yourself, then, Whit, get that bullet out before infection sets in. Margot, I need you. Can you help me dig?" Margot nodded. The movement was mechanical, automatic, her body responding to command, while her mind remained locked in the moment of the explosion, replaying it endlessly. The smile, the match, the white wave. For 6 hours, Stellan and Margot took turns digging with tin cups and bare hands through 20 feet of compressed snow above the chimney. They dug in shifts, 30 minutes on 30 minutes resting, because the work was exhausting and the thin air made their lungs burn. Their fingers bled, froze, bled again when the ice on their knuckles cracked from movement. Snow fell into their eyes and mouths and down their collars, melting against their skin in icy rivulets that soaked their clothes and stole their body heat. Stellan kept them moving. Keep going. Stop means death. Another 6 inches. Another foot. We are getting closer. I can feel the air pressure changing. Margot did not speak for those 6 hours. She dug in silence, her tears freezing on her cheeks in thin lines of ice that cracked when she moved her face. She dug with the same hands that had uncovered skulls in a Philadelphia garden, hands that seemed destined to dig through the earth's secrets one horror at a time. Behind them in the collapsed cabin, Dash operated on wit by candlelight. No anesthetic, no proper surgical tools. A knife heated in the candle flame, a pair of pliers from Remington's toolbox, a leather strap for Wit to bite down on. Dash spoke to his brother in a low, steady voice as he worked, narrating each step the way he had been taught in the Army field hospitals, because hearing the procedure described was somehow less terrifying than enduring it in silence. Wit did not scream. He gripped Margot's hand when she came to sit with him between digging shifts, his massive fingers closing around hers with a gentleness that broke her heart, and he endured the knife and the pliers and the cauterization without making a sound louder than a groan pressed through clenched teeth. "We are going to make it, little sister," he whispered. His face was gray and sheened with sweat despite the cold. His amber eyes were glassy with pain and fever, but his grip on her hand did not waver. Margot's first words in 6 hours came then torn from her like something that had been lodged in her throat and finally worked free. "Rem did not make it. He died protecting what mattered," Stellan said. He was standing behind her, his hands raw and bleeding out, his breath making clouds in the thin air. "All of us. Do not dishonor his sacrifice by saying it was for nothing. It was not for nothing. We are the proof that it was not for nothing. He saved our lives." Wit added, his voice barely audible. "Saved yours. That is what soldiers do, boy. That is what brothers do, yo. That is what men do for the people they love." "I never got to thank him," Margot said, and the word thank cracked in her mouth like thin ice. "You thank him by living," Stellan commanded, "by being strong, by surviving. Every day you live is a day Rem paid for. Make it count." 24 hours after the explosion, they broke through. Fresh air poured into their tomb in a rush that made all four of them gasp and then gulp and then simply stand there breathing, their faces turned upward toward the thin circle of gray sky visible at the top of the shaft, breathing air that tasted like the most precious thing in the world, because for 24 hours they had not been certain they would ever breathe it again. They widened the hole until they could crawl through one at a time, pulling themselves up through the snow shaft and emerging onto a landscape that looked like nothing they had ever seen. Dead Man's Canyon was gone. The walls, the trees, the creek, the corral, the woodpile, all of it buried under a flat white plain that stretched in every direction. The mountains still stood around them, unchanged and indifferent, their peaks bright with snow, against a sky of brutal, uncaring blue. But the canyon that had been their home for 6 years had been erased as completely as if it had never existed. And there was no body to bury, no grave to dig, no marker to place. Remington Voss had been taken by the mountain itself, absorbed into the stone and snow and silence, and the mountain would keep him forever. 6 men approached under a white flag 2 hours later. At their head walked Hewitt Lockridge, Dorian's younger brother, 28 years old, thinner than his brother, with none of Dorian's cruelty in his face. He looked exhausted and defeated and sick with something that might have been guilt. Stellan aimed his rifle, the barrel steady, despite his raw, bleeding hands. "Why should I believe you? Because I never wanted this," Hewitt said wearily. His voice carried the flat tone of a man who has seen too much in too short a time and has not yet figured out how to carry the weight of it. "Victor did. Father did. I told them it was madness. They did not listen. My brother is dead. Half the men who rode with him are dead. Judge Bramwell is dead, buried with the rest under 30 feet of mountain. I am going back to Montana and telling Father that you all died too. Every last one of you. As far as the world will know, this feud ended here with everyone dead on both sides." Margot stepped forward. "And Oswin Bramwell, Richard's son, is he coming after me?" "His father is dead," Hewitt said, meeting her eyes with a hushed directness that surprised her. "That might stop him." "Might not. Men like that do not let go easy. But he has no one to fund a search now and no legal cover without his father's connections. You should be safe, or safer at least. If he comes," Margot said, and her voice was steady and hard and carried not a trace of the frightened girl who had dug up skulls in a Philadelphia garden, "then I will be ready. I have learned to shoot since the last time a Bramwell man thought he owned me." Hewitt looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, a gesture that held respect and something close to apology. I should have stopped my brother years ago. I will carry that shame until I die. He looked at Stellan. If you ever see a Lockridge rider again, it will not be on my orders. This died with Dorian. It died with your brother. Let it stay dead. The 6 men rode away and never returned. Everything was gone. Cabin buried, supplies lost, horses dead beneath the avalanche. Winter clothes, food weapons, all of it sealed under 30 feet of snow and rock. They had 2 rifles, 3 knives, the clothes on their backs, and 85 miles of frozen mountain wilderness between them and South Pass City. We walk, Stellan said, or we die here. And we are not dying here. Not after what Rem paid for us to live. The journey took 8 days. 8 days that tested every ounce of strength, every reserve of will, every lesson the frontier had taught them. Temperatures that dropped to 40 below. No food except one rabbit that Stellan snared with his bare hands. On the second day, divided 4 ways, the meat so tough and stringy it was barely worth chewing. But they chewed it anyway because calories were the difference between living and dying. Whit could barely walk. His shoulder wound was infected, despite Dash's best efforts. The flesh around it angry, red and hot to the touch, pus seeping through the bandages. By the 3rd day, fever had set in. He became delirious, seeing things that were not there. Seeing Remington walking ahead of them through the snow, turning back to wave them forward with that grin. Rem, that's you, Whit mumbled through cracked lips, reaching towards something only he could see. Wait for me, brother. I am coming. It is me, Stellan said, catching Whit's arm and pulling it over his own massive shoulders, taking his brother's weight. Stay with us. Keep moving. Margot took her turn supporting Whit without complaint. She was half his size and a fraction of his weight, but she braced herself under his arm and walked step by painful step through snow that reached her waist. When Stellan tried to take over, she shook her head. I can do this. He would do the same for me. On the 5th day, the wolves came. 6 of them gaunt and desperate, driven to boldness by a winter that had depleted their usual prey. They smelled Whit's blood. They circled the group with the patient, calculating intelligence of predators who understand that weakness is an invitation. Stellan put himself between the pack and his family. Get behind me, all of you. He could not waste bullets. They had too few left, and they needed them for hunting if they were going to survive the remaining miles. So he fought with his knife. The alpha lunged. Stellan caught its jaw with one hand and drove his blade upward through the soft palate into the brain. The wolf convulsed and went limp. The second wolf came from the side. Stellan pivoted, slashed its throat in a single motion that opened the artery in a spray of hot red against the white snow. The third raked claws across his chest, opening wounds that would leave scars he would carry for the rest of his life. He kicked the animal away, drove the knife into its rib cage, felt it scrape against bone, and then find the heart. The remaining 3 wolves retreated into the trees, their yellow eyes watching from the shadows for another opportunity that would never come. Stellan stood in the snow covered in blood, both his and the wolves', his chest heaving, his breath making enormous white clouds in the frozen air. Margot did not scream. She tore strips from her petticoat with steady hands and pressed them against the wounds on his chest, while Dash heated the knife blade in a small fire kindled from tree bark and cauterized the deepest cuts. You saved us, Margot said. That is what I do, Stellan replied. On the 8th day, they stumbled into South Pass City, 4 figures moving through the snow, like ghosts barely recognizable as human. Whit supported between Stellan and Margot, his feet dragging, his eyes closed. Dash limping from frostbite that had blackened his left ear and 2 of Margot's smallest toes. Odette Flanagan saw them from the window of her boarding house and came running, her blue door slamming open behind her. She took one look at them, at their gaunt faces and bloodied clothes, and the empty space where a 4th brother should have been, and tears spilled down her weathered cheeks. Where is the 4th, she asked, though she already knew the answer. Could see it in their eyes, in the way they carried themselves, in the shape of grief that hung over them like a second winter. Gone, Stellan said simply. He saved us. 2 weeks later, the circuit judge brought news. Phineas Lockridge, the cattle baron, had been arrested for the murder of Reverend Hollis Birch. The Reverend's body had been found near Dead Man's Canyon with a Lockridge Ranch branding iron as the murder weapon. Without his sons to protect him and his empire crumbling, the old man would hang. The judge also brought legal papers. Margot's father's estate, $50,000 in total, had been recovered from Judge Bramwell's fraudulent probate claims. The money now belonged to her, the sole surviving heir of William Pemberton. More news followed in the months to come. Oswin Bramwell had been caught in New Orleans, arrested and tried for the murders of his previous wives. A fourth wife, one Margot had never known about, had survived his attempt to kill her and testified against him in open court. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Oswin Bramwell was hanged in Philadelphia in March of 1888, and the roses in Judge Bramwell's garden were dug up by the police, revealing the bones of three women who had been missing for years. Margot was free, truly, finally, completely free. With the money they bought 600 acres in Wind River Valley, a wide, gentle stretch of land sheltered by mountains on three sides, with a creek that ran clear and cold year-round and meadows that turned green with wildflowers in summer. They spent 4 months building a house, large and solid, with 4 bedrooms upstairs. One bedroom they left empty, Remington's room. They placed his tools inside his carving knives and chisels and the small handsaw he had used to shape wood into beauty. They hung his sketches on the walls, the portraits of Margot, the landscapes of the mountains, the drawing of 4 brothers standing together, identical in every way, drawn from memory, because no mirror was large enough to hold all 4 of them at once. 3 months after the avalanche, Margot discovered she was carrying a child. There was no way to know which brother was the biological father. They agreed, all 3 of them, without argument or hesitation, never to try to determine it. "The baby belongs to all of us," Stellan said, "just like Margot belongs to all of us." In December of 1888, exactly 1 year after their wedding, in the Crooked Chapel in South Pass City, Margot gave birth to a son, strong and healthy, with amber eyes that caught the firelight and turned it to gold. They named him Remington Stellan Whitaker Dashiell Voss, called him Rem. Stellan held the baby first. This man, who had killed wolves with his bare hands and faced down 50 armed riders and walked 85 miles through a frozen wilderness without breaking, this man cried. Tears fell from his amber eyes onto the blanket that wrapped his son, and he did not wipe them away. "Your Uncle Rem saved you before you were born," he whispered to the infant. "He died so you could live. You carry his name. Make it mean something." Now, 10 years later, I finished the story for my son. Young Rem, 9 years old, looks up at me with those amber eyes that are the same shade as mine, the same shade as his uncle's, the same amber that has marked the Voss family since before any of us can remember. "Uncle Rem was brave," he says. "The bravest man I ever knew, I confirm. The kindest, the most talented. The one who could find beauty in a blizzard and make you believe that beauty was the more important truth. He gave his life so we could have ours, so you could have yours." Margot adds her voice from across the room, where she sits with our other children gathered around her. Odette and Vivian, the 7-year-old twins, named for the woman who opened her blue door to us, and the grandmother who passed down a gold ring through 4 generations. Little Stellan, 4 years old, already as stubborn as his father, and twice as loud. He gave you life even though he never met you. Margot tells our son, "You have his name, his spirit, his heart. Every time you build something with your hands, every time you draw a picture or carve a piece of wood, he is with you." That night, after the children sleep, my brothers and I sit with Margot by the fire. The same way we have sat together for 10 years, the same way we will sit together for another 10 and another 10 after that, until the mountains themselves wear down and blow away. 10 years, I say, looking at the woman who walked into a livery stable in South Pass City with a trunk full of books and the dirt of a dead woman's grave still under her fingernails. 10 years, and I am still amazed by you every single day. She is not the fragile Philadelphia girl anymore. She is a frontier woman who can shoot straight enough to hit a tin can at 200 yards, ride a horse through a mountain pass in a snowstorm, set a broken bone, deliver a calf, and stare down a wolf without flinching. The stretch marks on her body tell the story of 4 children carried and born and loved. The missing toes on her left foot tell the story of a winter walk that should have killed her. The steadiness of her hands tells the story of a woman who found her own strength and never let go of it. She is harder than the mountains now, and more beautiful than anything Remington ever drew, though he would have tried. He would have sat by this fire with his charcoal and his paper and tried to capture what I see when I look at her, and he would have come close because Rem always came close to perfection. But even he could not have drawn the way firelight catches in her hair, or the way her eyes soften when she looks at our children, or the way her voice sounds when she says our names. "Do you ever regret taking me in?" She asked the same question she asks every year on the anniversary of our wedding. The same question she already knows the answer to but needs to hear, because some truths need saying out loud. Never three voices answer. You gave us purpose, I tell her. You gave us family. Whit adds his scarred shoulder rolling the way it always does in cold weather, the old wound reminding him of what he survived and what it could do it. You gave us love worth dying for dash finishes. Rem died for it, Margot says quietly, and the room goes still the way it always does when his name is spoken. A stillness that is not silence but reverence. And he would do it again, I say, without hesitating, without regretting. That is what brothers do, what soldiers do, what men do for the people they love. The next morning, Margot takes young Rem to his uncle's room. She opens the door that is always kept closed but never locked, and she leads our son inside, and she shows him the things that Remington left behind. The carving tools with their worn handles, the sketchbook filled with drawings of mountains and horses, and a young woman with blonde hair who is smiling like she has just discovered what happiness feels like. Your uncle built things, Margot tells him. He solved problems with his hands. He saw beauty everywhere, even in places where other people saw only darkness. He was brave and funny and kind, and he loved with his whole heart, and he gave everything so that we could live. I want to be like him. Young Rem says, his small fingers tracing the lines of a sketch, a drawing of four brothers standing on a ridge looking out over a valley that stretches to the horizon. You already are, Margot says. Every day. From the window of Remington's room, I can see Wind River Valley stretching out in the morning light. Whit and Dash are already in the meadow working the cattle, their breath making clouds in the cold air. Our children will run out to join them soon, four small figures racing through the grass, their laughter carrying on the wind. I am Stellan Voss, 44 years old. I have been a soldier, a rancher, a husband, a father. I have killed men and saved men. I have lost my brother and gained a family. I have walked through fire and snow and darkness and come out the other side, carrying something that all the fire and snow and darkness could not destroy. 10 years ago, a desperate woman answered our advertisement in a 6-month-old newspaper. She thought she was running from a monster. She was running toward her destiny. Margot did not just survive our world, she conquered it. She became harder than the mountains, stronger than winter, fiercer than any wolf. 4 became 3. But love did not diminish, it multiplied. We are the Voss family. We survived war, siege, winter, and loss. We built something beautiful from blood up blood and snow. We would do it all again, every sacrifice, every scar, every mile of that frozen walk, every bullet fired, every tear shed, because some things are worth dying for, and family is worth everything. Remington knew that. He proved it on a ridge above Dead Man's Canyon with a match and a smile and a courage that will echo through this family for generations. We honor him by living well, loving deeply, and protecting what he gave his life to save. This is our story, our legacy. This is what it means to be a Voss.